What's a dark secret slash questionable practice in your profession which we regular folks would know nothing about? You know the people who write instruction manuals or user guides and things you buy? Half the time, they've never even seen or touched the product. Some dude just sends us pictures, a rough description of how it's supposed to work, and that's it. ETA. Wow, this took off. To all the IT dudes of Reddit, I actually browsed the brand-specific subreddits to figure out what to add to my user guides because that's how little info my company provides me. Thanks for making my life easier. Story 2. Example 1. Kid about 7 years old brought a can of hard lemonade in his lunch. He had packed it himself, and when asked about it, he thought it was juice. His mother had given it to him before, so he thought it was something he could bring to school. Turns out she'd given it to him so he would sleep earlier and longer so she could go out. Example 2. A child, about 9, started cussing me out in front of her peers. In the process of trying to talk her down, she said that she could talk to me however she wanted, because her mom said so. After school, I talked with the parents. Turns out the girl was right. And apparently, I shouldn't have made her kid, quote, do that stupid work anyway. Example 3. Playing a game as a class, and one of my kindergarten students, when she messed up, loudly said, "Oh, F." I took her in the hall and she said her mom says it all the time. Briefly explained that isn't a school-appropriate word and told her not to say it again. I talked to her mom after school, not telling her that her daughter heard her say it. Mom immediately awkwardly laughed and said her husband talks like that, and she will let him know and remind him not to say stuff in front of his 5-year-old. Example 4. I've literally lost count the number of times parents knowingly send their sick kids to school. They will swear up and down they didn't know, not realizing their kid admitted to me or the nurse that their parent gave them medicine before they came to school. Okay, let's back up to example 1 here. A 7-year-old being given Mike's Hard Lemonade by their mother? I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but it's got to be at least 10 proof, so 5% alcohol. That is enough to knock out a 7-year-old, if not kill them, depending on how much they consume. What the heck is wrong with people? Story 3. Many hotels often sell rooms multiple times. Used to work in airport hotel, knowing that chances are some guests won't arrive due to missed or delayed flights, so we sell more rooms than we have. You have guests checking out from 2 to 3 a.m. due to early flights, so even though the room is technically still theirs, you quickly and sometimes poorly clean the room and tell the arriving unexpected guest or new booking there's a random computer issue and to wait 20 minutes and then check them into departed guest room praying. Multiple times I've had to run a kettle under a cold tap to hide the fact the previous guest used it 15 minutes before the new guest arrives. Story 4. Customs broker here. Every day, hundreds of thousands of containers and air shipments arrive into United States territory. The volume of customs entries entered every day is staggering. When we get licensed to be a customs broker, we're trained and tested not just on knowledge, but ethics. We even take a pledge to partner with CPB to uphold the law and cooperate with them should we come across anything suspicious. Why so much emphasis on this? Customs can't actually screen everything coming in. I'm oversimplifying, but CBP basically works on the honor system. You file an entry saying what the shipment is, and they just take your word for it and release it. This happens hundreds of thousands of times a day. Maybe at best, customs can screen 3 to 7% of what's coming in. The rest of just wave through. Story 5. When I was in high school, I had heart problems that required me to have multiple EKGs and ultrasounds, and eventually heart surgery. Seeing as it was my heart, I often had to lay topless on a table while doctors did their thing. The hospital I went to was right next to a university, and because of that, there were many times that there was an intern or resident doing the procedure. There was this one time this male intern spent about 45 minutes trying to find my heart on the ultrasound machine. I felt very uncomfortable because he was a lot more touchy and grabby than previous medical staff. After about 30 minutes, he goes and asks his mentor to help him. The mentor found my heart in less than 10 seconds. But wait, there's more. After going home and trying to brush it off as nothing, I find that this resident found me on both Instagram and Facebook and proceeded to attempt to follow me. I blocked his creepy ass and still to this day don't know how he found my Instagram handle because it's related to my middle name, which I never gave him. Edit. Yes, I meant heart, not here, lol. Tired typing. And no, I sadly didn't report him. It was several years ago. I was about 17 at the time, and I knew it was wrong what he did, but I just tried to give him the benefit of the doubt and move on. I know, stupid. I also didn't want to cause any more stress or drama to my family by speaking up. It's only recently that I've thought back on how inappropriate it was. Please, if this or anything happens to you that makes you feel uncomfortable, report it. You should not feel guilty for standing up for yourself. Story 6. former British customs officer here. The amount of international trade is staggering, and no government is able to do a 100% inspection on all of the freight that arrives. So we rely on past history, shady customs brokers included, lol, intel, etc., to target our efforts. And no, I'm not going to divulge anything more, so don't bother asking. So yeah, smuggling happens, whether that's goods, drugs, or people. But when we do find something, expect the world to drop on your head. Government wants its revenue, boys and girls, and it doesn't like being cheated of them, or finding 30 plus dead people in a shipping container. At all. Story 7. I'm sure most know this, but 99.9% of advertisements involving real people is acted and scripted. Even when the people being interviewed are indeed non-actors, they're prompted on what to say. For example, recently we interviewed a guy who won a car from one of our brands. First round. Interviewer. Congrats on your win. How do you feel? Guy. Really great. It's a real surprise, to be honest. Thank you. After several rounds in coaching, interviewer. Congrats on your win. How do you feel? Guy. I feel so lucky to have won a brand new car. The design and handling is first rate, and I'm most impressed by the fuel consumption. I'll definitely keep on holding brand as my top car of choice. Story 8. At a very large pizza chain restaurant that remains widely popular, we had these perforated pans for thin crust and stuffed crust pizza. They'd get washed in the dishwasher by hundreds per day, and at least half would still have burnt cheese and crap on them. Well, they were just stacked to dry. When making new pizzas in those pans, sometimes the pans that were left to dry overnight grew bits of mold around the burnt cheese. We were told to just put the dough on top because otherwise we'd never keep up with the orders if we rewashed everything. The manager said, quote, "Don't worry, it gets cooked." Story 9. There's a problem in substance abuse treatment in the United States called body brokering. Substance abuse treatment can be very expensive, and insurance companies pay a lot of money for a patient to be there. Treatment centers will hire body brokers to find addicts with the best, highest paying insurance and entice them to check in to the specific center. The treatment center then gives the broker a commission from the insurance money. This can go as far as body brokers literally putting more drugs into the hands of some addicts before they come in, because the higher level of drugs in your system upon admit, the more and longer the insurance company will pay to the treatment center. Brokers will also hire other addicts in a pyramid scheme type way to check into the treatment center, make friends with the other patients, and upon discharge, encourage relapse so they come back to treatment. Story 10. Padding paperwork, studies, to slow an auditor down. Every data point, all the minutiae of the calculations, unnecessarily dense explanations of statistical methods that go on at length with notes about distribution fitting. They, auditors, aren't usually very technical, so they stop at each spot along the way without realizing they can throw half the thing out. If you're good, you can balloon a 30-page document into 100 in a matter of minutes. Edit. I keep getting angry comments from finance people. Simmer down. This isn't about you. If you think it is, reread the post. Do you audit studies? Is distribution fitting relevant to you? Your industry does not own the term audit. Thanks. Story 11. I worked at a couple pizza places, 2 big chain ones. At one, the grease was unreal. The dishwasher basically had to be scraped once a day to get the thick film off. They didn't have an actual dishwasher either. Just made the drivers clean them, and the drivers didn't want to do the dishes, so they just tossed them in there haphazardly. I can't tell you how many times I'd find pans with a layer of oil still in them and have to send a bunch back through. My husband worked there for a short period, long after I quit. He said he caught one of the managers dipping plates in the sanitizing water and just sending them back out. Disgusting. The second big chain was all hand-washed and done properly, but I think that was more specific store-based than anything. Story 12. I don't know if this is a total secret, but a lot of the talking points about how expensive lawyers are, or how plaintiffs' lawyers get unreasonably high payouts for doing little work, is driven by corporations trying to discourage people from suing them. For example, most plaintiffs' lawyers are working entirely on a contingency basis, meaning that they advance all costs with the risk of no reimbursement and don't see a dime unless they win. And almost all will give you a free consultation. But by spreading the false narrative of it's going to cost you to even talk to a lawyer about that, Big companies discourage you from even consulting one and finding out the truth. Similarly, the narrative of plaintiffs' lawyers getting unreasonably high fees for cases is also designed to misrepresent the truth. For example, you hear a big company say, this class action got $250 for each person, but the attorneys got $250K or something. But the only reason the attorneys got all that money is because the company went balls to the wall litigating over $250, racking up attorneys' fees on both sides, when they could have short-circuited the whole thing from the outset by saying, you got us, here's your money, and paid next to nothing in attorney's fees. Plus, $250 times 1,000,000 people is a lot of money, meaning that the fees were justified by the total amount recovered, and that the case was not so insignificant to begin with. But by controlling the narrative, companies make it seem like it's unreasonable to be mad that they stole millions from consumers, and that it's even more unreasonable for someone whose job it is to take on all the risk and then get paid based on a percentage of what their results are. Sure, there are windfall cases, but usually those cases are needed just to offset the 10 other cases where you took a haircut on fees. It's like putting $100 in a slot machine, losing 10 times, and then hitting one jackpot on your last turn to make it back to 100, and then having the casino say, he got $100 for a single game of slots. This is ridiculous. Until you're forced to give back $90 of what you won. How likely are you going to be to play again? There's a lot more to this, but the TLDR is that companies are projecting when they paint lawyers as greedy, and do so in order to minimize the chance that they get called on their bullcrap. Story 13. Services costs are based on how much money you look like you have. I'm a woodworker/contractor. I come to your house, you tell me what you want done. My jumping off point is how much the market will bear. If I think you can afford a $4,000 solid oak bookcase, that's what I will quote you. I can make a cheaper version that I make less money on, but why would I do that? It's not that I'm just ripping you off, I'm selling you a better product, but in doing so, I make more money. So when getting a quote, it can pay to be very direct about what you want to spend, or you're going to be sold the most expensive version they think you can afford. Story 14. Documentary editor here. This varies depending on the content/genre, but documentaries can never be completely true. The ethics of filmmaking is disputed among many theorists. Those who work on documentaries understand that they're almost as fictional as completely made-up stories. Again, this depends on the project, but some common practices like frankenbiting, splicing sentences and words to create a different message, used especially in reality TV and really dramatic docs, are necessary to making a documentary watchable. There are hundreds of hours of footage, and if you see or hear something in a documentary, the creators wanted you to be exposed to that over a different piece of footage. This can lead to lives being destroyed, whether a person is posed as the enemy or antagonist, or they're displayed in a way that does not represent them accurately, which is most, if not all, of the time. I've had to take mental health days off from working because I become so worried about how these people's lives will be affected by my decisions. Edit. Nature documentaries can be harmful as well. You know how lemmings follow each other off of cliffs and commit mass self-unaliving? That was all faked in a documentary called White Wilderness by Disney. Lemmings aren't stupid, but this documentary made this as a commonplace fact. As far as suggestions for more factual documentaries, I honestly can't say unless I worked on them personally. As an editor, I know things that will never see the light of day, so it would be idiotic of me to say I can tell when something is left out or misconstrued. Suffice it to say that you'll never know as much as the editor did, and the editor and directors will never know as much as the actual people involved. One doc that came to mind is Blind Spot, Hitler's Secretary, because it's very sparse editing-wise. So it looks like raw footage that an editor would work with to edit into a more sensational film. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I think there's a part where the doc's crew lets her watch the interview and makes corrections to what she says. This may be wrong though, it's been a few years. Also, I acknowledge that ums and ahs are edited out, but isn't that still a form of manipulation? I worked on a small doc that was literally just noting inventions in the state. And the amount of editing we had to do to make the older people watchable was significant, so that they sound completely different on film than they do in real life. So I myself am not going to disclose what company it is, but I have a little bit of insider knowledge into how certain reality TV shows are manipulated and edited in order to tell a story that the showrunners want to be told. So certain characters, they may say or do or believe in controversial topics, but those are edited out and it only showcases those people's high points. And then conversely, maybe someone who has average or above average IQ and is genuinely a nice person has only their lowlights or worst moments shown to the viewers at home. That way they can portray that person as a villain. But if you see this person give an interview after the show or you happen to encounter them IRL, you realize like, hey, you're not at all like you were on the show. And it's like, yeah, that's because the showrunners portray people the way that they want you to see them in order to make for more compelling viewing. So I totally get where this guy is coming from. Story 15. Lots of unethical shipping companies, even today, dump a lot of garbage, oily sludge, waste contaminated water, and oil out when sailing in international waters far away from the shore. There are only a few handful players today who are actually executing business trades while still keeping the carbon footprint and environment as one of their core policies. I'm glad to be working with one of them. I'm a merchant marine who works as an engineer on mega container ships like this. Disclaimer, link takes you to my YouTube video of a container ship in port and eventually sailing off under the Golden Gate Bridge. Story 16. Church worker here. This may be specific to the church I work for, but I think it's pretty common for bigger, 1,000+ members churches. They're two-faced. They tell the janitorial crew, janitorial service is truly a ministry, and it's so good and so important. But guess what? When the church needs to make cutbacks, we're some of the first ones screwed over. We're the ones expected to clean until 2 to 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning after people have used the building until midnight. As a woman, I've straight up been harassed by the guy pretty high up in the church hierarchy, and nobody really has my back. There's so many fake, judgmental, hateful people who hide behind the guise of Christianity. People who will lock people out of the building and laugh at them. They tell the people who aren't dressed presentable enough to sit in the back, if that person isn't run off by their frozen, hateful stares. This is so anti what a church and Christianity should be. Edit. Yes, I know that churches are terrible isn't a secret. Also, thanks for the award. Edit 2. I just want to make it clear, I have never, do not currently, and absolutely will never attend this church. My parents go to this church and put me on the membership, and I even canceled my membership to this church. The only connection is I work there. Story 17. I used to work fast food. Not gonna say where. Every single person I work with had tried marijuana, but that's lame, so let's take it up another step. In reality, the majority of people come here for work because we have nowhere else. Either we grew up in poverty and never had a chance to go to college, we commit crimes in our youth that we regret, or struggle with drugs and alcohol. In my Northwest state, a raise from minimum wage to $10, like we got because of the virus, we're essential workers and are rewarded for working in a crisis. But when you go to a fast food restaurant, just think about why we're there. Yeah, we made mistakes. Yes, we're facing consequences. But they aren't bad people. My coworker, who is an ex-cartel member with face tattoos, was nicer than most of the elderly white customers I met. He's twice the man as many people I've met. The people here are coming for a second chance. Please let us have it. Thanks for all the love. I read every reply. Story 18. Library workers are all a bunch of tatted up punks outside of work. You usually can't see the tattoos because we cover them up with cardigans. We also will ignore parental restrictions if their children have their own library card, meaning if a parent tells us her kids can't read a certain book or watch a certain movie, we will disregard it and check it out to them anyway. If parents want to control what media their child consumes, they shouldn't give them their own library card. Story 19. Lots of performing musicians don't ever really get over stage fright. Many of them take beta blockers to help with nerves, although it's less about the mental side of it and more the fact that you physically can't perform if you get so nervous that your hands are shaking. That's what beta blockers help with. You'll probably still feel anxious mentally, but any physical effects like shaking or sweating will be gone. Not really a dark secret, but there's not usually bad side effects of beta blockers, but I guess some people might see that as cheating in a way. Personally, I find it kind of inspiring knowing that lots of people struggle with the same thing as me, and there's a solution that isn't just suck it up and deal with it. Story 20. I used to manage an Asian supermodel for about 5 years. I was frequently brought along when she met with other celebrities, usually Western, sometimes other Asian. I was still teaching her English as I'm native and am fluent in her language, to ensure she understood everything and didn't make any major cultural faux pas. I don't know if this qualifies as dark per se, but questionable for sure. I won't name names, but many of these actors, musicians, etc. also have other businesses and brands. They would sit down and offhandedly formulate what fashion/trends they would start soon so that they could have goods waiting to be sold to accommodate people participating in these trends that they themselves started. They would also plan out propping each other's business plans up by reinforcing the trends with appearances, comments to fashion magazines, etc. The first time I heard this kind of talk, I thought they were just being full of themselves, as they're very prone to do anyway. And then I saw the effects of the talks happening a few months later, over and over. This is what we'll have people wear in the fall. Started production yet? Next week. Send me the sample when it's ready and I'll make sure my demographic is on it. Your concert is in NYC in June, right? Yeah, I'm a medium. Here's my manager's number. She'll make sure I get it in time for the show. Story 21. When you order a pizza, if you have unpopular or toppings that are not picked often, you're most likely eating a mixed bag of fresh and spoiled ingredients, due to pizza kitchens having to refill the toppings containers every week. If the management does not force kitchen staff to empty them out and clean them, you will end up eating rotten and rancid meat and veg. Edit. I didn't think my highest rated comment would be about my sinful pizza past. For those who questioned how this stuff is allowed/could happen, the district I worked in had management that was very intermingled and interchangeable, where managers and GMs would go from store to store on a weekly basis. The uncleanliness is more of an established tradition at this point than anything else. On top of that, most of the employees are young, potheads, no offense, and older dudes and a few young women trying to get quick cash. If they aren't told to care, they won't. So when leadership craps the bed, things can still keep running, especially if the district manager's weekly check-in is him coming in and making sure everyone is wearing a uniform, and then he walks out. Edit. Thank you for the cake day wishes. Story 22. Alarm/camera tech for residential and business. The monitoring center you pay for is a lie. There's a pretty good chance no one is responding, or it's being sent to a call center handling tons of calls. But that doesn't matter, because the police won't usually dispatch for unconfirmed alarms, if at all. The gear is stupid cheap and easy to install. I literally had one-day training and just looked everything up on Google or YouTube. It's all on there, including install and override codes for most systems since the 90s. Most of the stuff they sell you is pretty worthless. You're better off monitoring and servicing your system yourself. You can get it all on eBay for pennies what you'll be charged by your company. Even used can be reprogrammed and set up fine. If you really want to be secure, get a good dog. But tons of you are locked into years of contracts over basically $30 to $40 worth of gear. Story 23. A lot of the companies that are doing the background checks that are required you pass before you're employed look the other way while your information is siphoned off to servers in Russia and China, passing your information indirectly to the governments of said countries. Some financial firms' data, when you sign up for an account with someone like PayPal, for example, will end up being shared with over 80 financial institutions and governments, which is something that such firms would rather you not fully understand, even if they eventually admit to it by way of their TOS. Story 24. I've worked in vet med since 2013. I have this habit, especially when owners don't want to be present for their pet's euthanasia, in which I give their pets chocolate, pieces of my meal, meat, bread, cheese, even onions/garlic, or the best wet food from our pantry prior to them being given the drugs that help them pass. They don't suffer from the damaging effects of those foods if they're being euthanized minutes after. I like to give them a taste of something they would never get to try otherwise. Of course, I would never do this unless the pet was already en route to the room where the procedure would take place. Story 25. I work at a country jail in the Midwest. The most disturbing thing about jail is the terrible loop some inmates get stuck in. Many inmates with mental issues get caught in this loop where they can't have any clothes or items because they'll try to end themselves and they're locked in their cell for 23 hours a day. This makes them even more angry, so when they're finally let out, they lash out at staff and then are locked down again. It's a vicious cycle for a lot of inmates and makes a lot of mental illness a whole lot worse. Staff can't do anything, though, because if they allow the inmate with mental illness to socialize, then they risk a lawsuit from those around them, because of the individual's history of violent outbursts. Majority of hospitals won't take them because they won't risk their staff, so they're just stuck in a room and their only hope is consistent medication stabilizing them. Story 26. I worked a small chain of Japanese restaurants when I was in college run by 2 Taiwanese women that had so many questionable practices. Here are a few that come to mind. We had a tip jar at the register along with one of those UNICEF jars near the drinks. Employees never saw any of those tips and the charity money was also pocketed by the owners. The cooks all lived at the same house that was owned by the owners of the restaurant. They were given a certain amount of money each month and allowed to live there rent-free, but they only got 1 day off a week. All of them were undocumented and great guys who I was friends with. Delivery driver that started in the morning or ended at night had the responsibility of picking up the cooks or dropping them off at their house at night. One of the owners, Carol, was the main reason why people quit all the time. She was a major female dog that loved berating people. Her favorite rite of passage was sharpening her sushi knife next to you as you washed dishes and then all of a sudden slapping you on the arm with the back end, scaring the hell out of you. Carol had a habit of watching the cameras and calling the restaurant if she saw you standing around and screaming at you. Story 27. Schools will lower their admittance standards for international students since schools depend on their money to stay afloat. The more cuts the system does towards the public system, the worse it gets. Not only do you have lower teaching standards just by having outdated infrastructure and bloated classes, but the mean skill level of your classes is also lowered. I've even seen students attend classes who were completely unable to speak any English. When I say any, I mean any. They had to start with, "Hello, my name is I, you, he, she, it." Chair, desk, table, weeks into their program. And because of the way the class hours and modules are constructed, it's impossible for them to take 2 months off to take full-time language classes to solve the problem. So they have to waste everyone's time and money, theirs, for months and months while failing everything. Story 28. Not my industry, but I was researching it before being laid off. Antimicrobial doesn't mean much. Lots of people are talking about how their products are antimicrobial right now, for obvious reasons. Antimicrobial is not antiviral. It does not prevent COVID-19. And most things that say they prevent COVID have only been tested against substitutes from cats. Further, things can be advertised as containing or using antimicrobials, but they may only protect the product from things like fungal or bacterial degradation, and nothing for you, the user. Now, to advertise as antimicrobial, it does have to be proven effective, but it could be effective against strep or staph or something much larger than the SARS/CoV-2 virus. Don't be buying antimicrobial products or cars or whatever thinking it will prevent you from getting COVID without doing your research. Story 29. When you go into a phone shop to get a new mobile and we ask if you're an existing customer, it's usually because our best deals are reserved for new customers. Also, if we tell you we're out of stock on a popular phone, it's sometimes because we're down to just a couple of that device and are saving them in case we can use them to close a deal with a new customer. If you want to get the best deals, you usually need to change to a new provider. You could walk out of my store after I tell you we don't have any, walk into the store next door and transfer your number to a no-contract plan with them, then walk back into my store saying you want to bring your number across from a competition, and I will somehow discover a phone and the model and color you wanted was out the back after all. Story 30. Teachers are often made to cap grade failures at 20% or lower. The students that did not demonstrate enough knowledge or credit to pass are still moved along to the next grade. This results in having 9th graders in my English 1 class who read below grade level, sometimes as stunted as on a 2nd or 3rd grade level. These students are constantly frustrated and can become behavior issues. It's also heartbreaking to identify and feel helpless in catching the student up due to current demands from administrators and school leaders. Story 31. Obligatory, not really my profession, but very related. I studied archaeology for quite a while, and people are usually not happy when they want to build something, but we find archaeological artifacts here. All constructions must be stopped, sometimes for months or even years, before we do our work. Archaeology just has higher preference, because archaeological sites are, obviously, destroyed for good when that new hypermarket is finished. Very common practice between builders is to just dump those, often incredibly historically precious, artifacts to trash and never tell anyone, so their construction works can continue unbothered. Story 32. I'm working for a pharma company. Most drugs you buy for one brand is the same drugs you can buy from a different brand. The packaging is different, the tablet might be different, the marketing might be different, but there's only one manufacturer for both of those items, and it's only a matter of your preference to pick which one you want. Which logically you would choose the cheaper one, right? Wrong. Sometimes the more expensive brand gets higher purchase rate. Why? Simply because people trust it more. That's the curse of marketing, friends. It sells you things you don't need and makes you feel like you need it, even if you don't. Story 33. Food service industry. If you're truly unpleasant and complain about the same things each time, we will not continue to give you free food, comp anything, make your food first, or give you stellar service. You will receive the food to the same standard as everyone else, and service will be the same as everyone else, or bare minimum. If we continue this relationship where you tolerate us and we tolerate you, great. If you make the complaint that breaks the camel's back, you'll be asked to never come back, with every person working in that restaurant ready to hold management to account to follow through on the banning. We don't spit in food or do anything unsanitary to get back at rude and demanding customers. We're a team, and the team makes food for employee meals, friends, and family. Seeing a coworker spit in someone's food would be like seeing your brother spit in the stew that your mom will have. You're grossed out and toss the stew and your brother out of the kitchen. A job is still a job. We take pride in our food and reputation. We don't want to lose said job because some moron can't keep it together. If anything, we will do what it takes to get you out of our face as quick as possible. If we get the picture that you won't get out of our face anytime soon, we take our time to rile you up so that you're more likely to demand a refund and leave because it's taking so long. Going on and on and on about your complaint means you will in fact wait longer and longer for your food to be replaced. I don't need to hear for 10 minutes the great injustice of having your food order rung up/made incorrectly. I don't need it explained like I'm an idiot who can't understand words that are bigger than 2 syllables either. For people who say, you always make it wrong, you always forget, the last time I was here there was a problem, etc., perhaps your communication and order is the problem. Tell me there's a problem when there is a problem. We can fix problems. If you're ordering something incorrectly, we can educate you on how to order it so it makes sense and is what you actually want. For the people who complain the food is cold, it happens. It'll take time to remake your order again. If we remember you as a frequent "it's cold" person, you will most likely get overcooked food because we're cooking your food longer, using a hotter plate, and plating your food last if you're in a group. If you complain for any reason, the server will tell you that's how it comes. If you want something else, you're still paying for both orders. We aren't remaking your food 2 to 3 times for free anymore. Sorry. Don't try to tell me what fresh versus unfresh food looks, tastes, and feels like. We make judgment calls daily about what is fit to serve or not. We see food in all its glory from prep to cooked to holding time to expiration time, etc. We have standards for max time something can be held. We have standards for appearance, temperature, consistency, and portions. We know what fresh food looks, feels, and tastes like because we serve it 12 hours a day. We also know what unfresh food looks, feels, and tastes like because we throw it away all day too. Story 34. Building codes are only actually understood and applied correctly in really important or large buildings, even if you sometimes get a public library where you can only access books by using stairs. My first job in architecture taught me some fundamental fire safety codes wrong. I was basically just a technician and wouldn't study architecture for years after I got the job, so my bosses mostly did the code analysis. I learned the correct way years later when I actually had to pick up code books and figure out how to not get sued. Just about every job since has also gotten these same codes wrong, and no matter how many times I explain why they're wrong, the problem persists. There are tons of buildings out there planned for about half the code required occupants because architect and plans examiners are stubborn morons. Story 35. Lots of corruption goes on in nonprofit organizations that claim to do good. Many organizations build the budgets of their projects using inflated, unrealistic costs that don't reflect the current market in terms of actual competitive prices of things. So what they do is they quote really high costs in their project budget lines, spend only a portion of that during the actual implementation of the project, and skim the rest of it. This also applies to the actual funds that end up going directly to beneficiaries of the nonprofit's projects. I've seen projects where literally 80% of the budget is all just staff salaries, equipment, and other resources, while the remaining 20% or less actually goes towards helping the people that the charity claims to work for. Story 36. Not a huge secret and not really questionable, but people who don't know better would probably find it a bit scandalous. The internet is held together by Velcro and twist ties. You know those immaculately bundled cables and pristine data centers you see pictures of on the internet? That's how a very, very tiny minority of equipment and cable runs look. Edit. Just a little elaboration. Most of the stuff is a mess of documentation as well. Because companies merge or get bought, or some close and sell their assets, or people who know how stuff works leave, the documentation on any cable run or piece of equipment can be anything from meticulously detailed to completely non-existent. and I really mean that last part. We had a certain provider, who I will not mention, who had a fiber cut about a week ago. Because that fiber was from a different company that has merged at least twice now to become part of the company in question, there's literally no documentation on it. They traced the break to 70 miles from our data center. Since there is no documentation, they had no clue what route the cable took between its two endpoints. And because it's not a straight line, that means they're left with a 70-mile radius where that break could be. They basically had a guy here at the endpoint sending signals while techs randomly drove around, opening manhole covers within their best guess of where it went. 5 hours later, they decided to try narrowing it down from the other end. Story 37. I work for a hotel doing conferences and big events such as weddings. I would advise people to never have a host bar, i.e. all the drinks for the evening go on one tab. For example, the owner of the company may pay for all the drinks, or the family of the bride or groom may pay for all the drinks. It's commonplace for my bosses to come along and just press random buttons on the till to rack up the bill without actually serving any guests. If I catch them doing it, I'll immediately get rid of them, as it's not right. They don't get any extra pay if we sell more at the bar, so the only reason they do it is to be like, look at me, to their boss. Story 38. Worked as a mailman. Delivered packages to a mom all the time. Her kid asked every time I was there, could he go outside to play? She told him, every time, no, because he would get his clothes dirty. Delivering letters at their box one day, and he was playing in the front yard, huge smiling face, waving at me, completely naked. This was 20 years ago, no cell phone, and was new at the job. I waved back and drove on, but he didn't get his clothes dirty, I guess. Story 39. Yes, your nurse knows your lab results and you can see your X-ray/CT/MRI. No, we can't tell you the results. The doctor has to. ER wait times are not just to irritate you/make you miserable. Nurse-to-patient ratios are important. There's a lot of paperwork associated with people already admitted. It's done in order of importance first. Your left toe pain will not be seen before the suspected stroke. Sorry. Your ER doctor probably won't remember your name, but your nurse will. Be nice to your nurse because they can do a lot for you. Just tell your nurse the truth. Chances are we've heard it before and we'll find out about it soon enough. Story 40. When correcting your university exams, we will meet up together, bring sweets and crisps and the occasional alcoholic beverage and whatnot, and then have an absolute blast making fun of how dumb your answers are. We will give and deduct points where giving and deducting is due, but if you wrote something stupid, then we will read it aloud for everyone to laugh at. We will also take a blank exam to write down the dumbest answer we could find for each of the exercises. This top dumb exam will be kept for future entertainment. Story 41. I work at a 5-star hotel. If you complain about something, we have to note the complaint, how we handled it, and what the outcome/solution was in your guest profile. That's no dark secret, of course. However, every staff member in the whole house can read those notes. In fact, we do it for fun, and we can word them however we like. So if you're an a-hole about whatever your complaint is, the whole house is going to know before you even finish screaming at the front desk, and we're all going to despise you. You'll be that guest. And we 100% know when you're lying or exaggerating about things to get free stuff. That will also go into your notes, and you won't get anything for free. Do us all a favor and be honest. We'll be happy to help. Story 42. Childcare in Australia. We have staff-to-child ratios we need to maintain. A typical practice to have fewer staff on the floor is to count under the roof. Basically, we count as many kids down as we can to the lower ratio. For example, kindy rooms can have 10 children to 1 staff, while toddlers have 5 children to 1 staff. If the toddler room only has 2 toddlers, you can fill their spots with kindies instead, so you'll have 13 kindies to 1 staff and 2 toddlers to 1 staff. Not the worst practice, but is used regularly and can be for an entire day, which impacts the children and staff. The dodgiest practice is transitioning young. You can transition to a higher ratio 6 months before they meet that age if they are developmentally ready. Say a baby that's aged 18 months and is in the 1:4 ratio can move into the 1:5 ratio if they're developmentally ready. Majority of the time, the children are not ready to move that young. It's used as an easy way to shove more children into the higher ratio to have more spaces for rooms with smaller ratios, ensuring there are more available enrollments for the service. Story 43. 1. Never actually proved recommended cooking times killed any harmful bacteria. Never will either. Neither R&D or the Q&A team could produce any research documentation supporting the method. I could find lots of papers documenting how heat killed Listeria or E. coli, but it wasn't consulted in making our policies or recommended baking times. The way our baking times were set was a range was given at multiple times and temps, and we baked and compared. Almost half the time, the site's QA supervisor would set the times because they did the most baking. 2. Any place that uses pipe flour transfer has an infestation of flour beetles everywhere the pipes go. If the ceilings are not cleaned monthly, then they will be anywhere dust collects and it will be thick on the ceiling. Story 44. About 20 years ago, I worked at a call center. I did customer service for a cable company for the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Long Island. We did everything from billing questions to tech support. The job was cake, and we met some characters for sure. The weird thing was we were absolutely forbidden to tell them where we were located. As a matter of fact, we were expected to tell everyone who asked that we were located at A, B, or C call center in New York. We were even expected to be able to give directions around the city if someone had to find our office. I was working there on 9/11. We were told to turn on anyone who was disconnected for non-payment, as long as they weren't a hard disconnect, cut from the pole. We unfortunately were unable to send out texts for anything at that time. $10,000 fine if our trucks were blocking the roads. We heard that the actual New York offices were closed at that time, and just talking to all the people who were experiencing the tragedy up close was heartbreaking. Fast forward about a year, and when our contract was not renewed, so many reps gave people huge credits on their bills and months of the highest premium packages. I grew up in South Florida and had the strongest New York accent for quite a while after. Story 45. If your kids' teachers don't use weed, they get very drunk on the regular. Some do both. Didn't know that until I started teaching, though had a few teachers I knew did one or the other during high school, largely after they were fired for smoking/drinking on the job. But what can you expect from those who work obscene hours? Before school, after school, weekends, and breaks are not free times for teachers. And get crappy pay. Have to do something to relax in the next to no time given. Story 46. Anyone who even studies teaching will learn most teachers don't know what they're teaching and usually have maybe a day's prep time. Also, the amount of bad-mouthing they do about the kids is pretty harsh. Safety is sometimes not the number one concern. I've worked in theaters where you could probably burn the place down by turning on some of the lights in the heater. Also, strangely enough, most theaters I've worked with have ghost stories, like full-on apparitions. A lighter shade of questionable, but you'd be surprised how many people who work around ice cream are lactose intolerant. I don't know if it's a hiring thing because the bosses think they won't eat the ice cream. They do. But yeah, it was pretty funny learning how many people I worked with could empty a room if they sampled the new flavor. Story 47. This one is hard for me to talk about. At a physical rehabilitation facility, literally connected to, but not affiliated with, a certain hospital, there have been several cases of malpractice that are going completely unchecked. Let's just say, if there's not a butt in a bed at this rehab, the rehab does not get paid. Therefore, if a patient is dying and needs to go to the neighboring hospital's emergency room, a lot of times they don't. Sometimes these patients get so obviously distressed that even the supervisor will approve this transfer. But recently, a young man died a tragic and very sudden death. He should not have died. The only reason he died is because of money. He should have went to the emergency room, and I will never stop carrying the weight of knowing that. It's sick. Story 48. Dental labs. If you need a new crown or bridge, the dentist orders a custom one from a dental lab to fit the area he drilled in your mouth, or a denture that fits the tissues in your mouth. I've seen dental labs which range from state-of-the-art, clean, and pristine to absolutely effing gross. Imagine a lab technician making a medical prosthesis while chain-smoking cigars inside. Old food laying around for weeks, cigarette butts all over the tables, rusty equipment, etc. And then those prosthetics go in your mouth. Also, I'm in a state that has their own dental board and allow dentists from overseas to retain their licenses from abroad and practice dentistry without going to an American dental school. I see these dentists work firsthand, and it's effing appalling. I come from a family of dentists, so I know what good dentistry looks like. These crap doctors are drilling out decayed teeth, completely missing the correct spots to grind, and taking out whole cusps of adjacent natural teeth. Because he's exposing the dentin layer, he's accidentally making it so these adjacent teeth, which are healthy, will probably need a crown in the next couple years because of his malpractice. Every dentist I've spoken to says I should report these hacks to the ADA. Imagine going in for surgery for gastric bypass, and the surgeon accidentally cuts your liver up like it's nothing. Effing disturbing. This is why you go to a reputable dentist and not the cheapest one possible. Story 49. Way late here, so apologies. Tire/tire fitter by trade. In Australia, when you change your tires, we charge a disposal fee, usually $4 per tire. If we feel the tires are reusable, we sell them for $44 at least. Cause it craps me, I'll let you folks in on some secrets. Rotate, effing rotate your tires every 10,000 kilometers. Once a month, pressure check them. Not at a gas station, do it yourself or at a reputable tire shop. The more weight, the more pressure needed. Small vehicles, 36 psi, sedans, 36 to 38 psi, low-profile tires, 40 psi. Pickup trucks or utes in Australia, 36 psi in the front and 32 in the rear unless you add weight. Again, more weight, more pressure. Pickup LS and utes in the rear go 45. Find a dead straight and even road. Take your hands off the wheel. Pulls in either direction without acceleration, you need an alignment. Do it now. It'll save you money. Story 50. I'm basically a website analyst. My job is to analyze website designs, traffic, etc. to find ways to improve them. I'm sure most of you know about Google Analytics and whatnot, that I can see when people visit the site, which pages they visit, general interests, etc. However, did you know I can also watch a video replay of exactly what you did on a site? There are many tools out there which capture recordings of what users do on a site. I can re-watch these as videos. It's basically a screen recording where I can watch your cursor moving on the screen from the moment you get onto the site to the moment you leave, even across multiple pages. I can see your typing too. The tools do have automatic systems that censor personal info such as addresses, but these systems are far from foolproof. I've even seen addresses I shouldn't have seen many times. I honestly don't think this is okay. Statistics is one thing, but those recordings feel like an invasion of privacy. It's my least favorite part of the job, especially for someone who wants to call themselves a privacy advocate. But right now, I'm not in a position to say something about it. Yeah, this is incredibly invasive. How in the world is this legal? I mean, even if you're not doing anything shady on your computer, like watching adult content or, I don't know, something like that, that's still incredibly intrusive and absolutely not okay. What the heck? Story 51. No, your computer isn't secure. If I have access to it, I can get into an administrative account without knowing the password in under 5 minutes, depending on the speed of your POS computer, of course. If you have your account connected to a Microsoft account, this complicates things a little bit, but I could always just make a brand new admin account and delete your old account. I also learned how to do this working at Office Max, fixing computers of old people who forgot their passwords to log in. If I'm mistaken, the backdoor to doing this goes all the way back to Windows XP. I can also remove a syskey in most cases. This is incredibly helpful when old people give access to Indian scammers who then lock up their computers. I can do all this with a Windows installation USB, something I can make out of any USB bought in stores for free from Microsoft's own website. No special tool required. Story 52. I used to be a travel agent. It's common practice to mark up, blatantly lie, about the price in order to increase your profit/margin/commission. Although it's not an official written practice, you're pressured to do so, and if you refuse, as I did, then you're guilted when you don't reach your impossible quota, which heavily relies on scamming others to make more money. And if you reach this impossible quota, then your commission percentage is risen, so your paycheck is much higher. I made far less than the rest of my team and was singled out and guilted multiple times to talk about my productivity and why I wasn't making the company as much as my peers. Story 53. I'm a gravedigger. Many people don't know the people escorting the coffin to the grave are the same that will bury the person. When the crowd is gone, we take off the suit and put on our work clothes. Before we start the burial, we have to get the chains off the lift that lowers the coffin loose. To do this, we have to go into the grave and stand on the coffin, then step on the sides and lift the coffin with a metal hook pull. Another will jank the chains from under the coffin. After that, we can remove the lift. Most people also don't realize in the West, most burial places use heavy machines like cranes to fill the grave with sand. In between, we use the machine, when no public is near the grave, to stomp on the grave to tighten the sand to prevent collapsing with heavy rain, etc. Sometimes this process destroys the lid of the coffin, as these days they mostly use weak, cheap wood. The coffin then fills up with sand. Most people would be shocked to realize this is the standard process. With Corona, we have to wear protective, and when the crowd is gone, we disinfect the coffin before lowering it in the grave, as we have to stand in the grave to remove the chains of the lift and to remove the iron sheds preventing the grave to collapse when filled up. Also, it is very common of grave diggers to be mostly atheist and quite brutish hard workers. You can compare us with gardeners and construction workers. There's a lot of dark humor in our profession. Also, when we have to dig up people, the process is quite harsh. The skeleton is completely covered with sand, and we have to jank and pull on the body to get it out. Also, the bones are loose, so most of the time, you won't literally find a 100% of the skeleton, meaning pieces of your grandma's example may stay buried in the original place for decades until they get digged up when clearing an entire graveyard and strewn with the industrial trash. Story 54. I'm an insurance adjuster. How much we like you affects how much you get paid. Sometimes I'll have, for example, a sweet old couple who's polite and friendly. Their roof is totaled, but they have a huge deductible and their policy is ACV only. So I'll tweak the roof size and add some extra stuff until they have enough money to pay the deductible and the money left over after the depreciation without a penny out of their pockets. And sometimes someone is an ass and I strictly follow the policy to the letter and they miss out on thousands. Also, roofers pay us for leads. I typically will get 3% of any claim they get a contract on. I recently had a $3.5 million claim that my referral contracted with, and I got a cool $75K for one day's work. Very unethical, but impossible to resist at my pay rate. Story 55. I work in a large chain bookstore, basically equivalent to Barnes & Noble, from what I understand. I work operations 99% of the time when the store is closed, and we often do returns, which means sending back certain books to the publishers. This is done to save money, make room for new higher demand stock, and so on. Well, some publishers are cheapskates and don't want to pay shipping costs for boxes of books, so they ask us to do strip cover returns. It's what it sounds like. We rip the covers off the books and send only those, while throwing the rest of the book in recycling. It's only ever the cheapest format of book, but it still makes me sad sometimes thinking about how many people would love to have them. Obviously, we've been instructed to never do or discuss this in front of customers. Story 56. Organic commercial farming is a corporate monster no different to non-organic commercial farming. They don't care about your health and they don't care about the environment. They only care about their bottom line. Commercial organic pesticides are less effective, more toxic to the environment, and last at least 3 times longer in the soil. They are also highly toxic to aquatic creatures, which are often affected by groundwater and irrigation runoff. This, combined with larger crop losses and lower yield, means even more crops and hence more pesticides are needed to receive the same yields. By comparison, non-organic pesticides are heavily pressured, tested, and regulated to target pests more specifically and cause less ecological fallout. They are also free to change and adapt their formulas to be safer and more efficient. Basically, commercial organics are worse for the environment than non-organic commercial farming, and the corporations are just corporations who care about the bottom line and nothing else, not to be confused with home organics. Story 57. How toxic is that wastewater? Will it still be toxic if we mix it with a lot of other water? What about if we store it during the day when the water testers might visit, then dump it at night when no one can catch us? That carbon capture equipment only works 2 days before breaking? Let's only turn it on when someone turns up to look at it. Damn, I filled the wrong color bottle. Well done. This product plus with extra cleaning power and twice the price. Engineering is an entire industry devoted to questionable practices and dark secrets. So much so, it took me 10 years to straighten out my current chemical plant from the shady practices it used to do. The real enemy to the environment is lazy employees and poor designs. Legislation isn't going to fix it. Only reduction of consumerism will. Story 58. I worked in advertisement. You're all being tracked and logged, all the time. We know where you sleep, where you work, where you walk, what you want to buy, what you like, what age are you. We know literally everything. We can even predict when you might want to make a baby, or if you can afford a baby. There's something called privacy before, but no one cares. We do not need your personal information. You have a token, like numbers in concentration camps. That token identifies you, but because it's not connected with personal information, so I can't name you, but I can easily, since data is there, just not processed. But to sell you crap, we don't really need to know your name. We already know everything else. People are afraid of microchips, treat COVID-19 as a big conspiracy and such. Why the hell would we need that? Google already parse your emails and your search history, and you all use Google. You give us your location information. 99% of normal people don't know that there is such a thing. Every single one of you has a phone with you. Phones with apps. Free apps are the best, because you just agree to everything and we often use those apps to track you. Now, the funny part about it. We're still pretty bad at figuring out if you bought something. Not the big crap. If you bought a house or car, it's something we can actually recognize. But if you Google toaster and then you were seeing toasters for a week after you bought it, that's because we didn't know you bought it. This is why there's a push in many countries to allow Visa, MasterCard, etc. to process your card history, scrap personal information from it, and sell us. This way we would know your habits, what you already bought, what you might need, etc. And we already do that partially. There are apps that allow you to log in via SoFort or some other questionable crap, so we can parse your card history. Then we kindly tell you how much you spend on what. In reality, that's just something we did to get your card history. Scrap the personal info and match our history about you. It's no different than that Russian app that made you older, that everyone were using that in theory was showing you how you will look in 10 years, and in reality parsed your biometric data for further use. Welcome to Information Age. Story 59. I don't know if this is the case for all of them, but I wouldn't advise eating food at those paint and sip places. They cycle through cooks like crazy because the pay is pathetic, so they ended up forcing the artists to take cooking shifts. They pay cooks less, and tips are only for the instructors, so naturally we resent those shifts. There's not really a lot of room in the kitchen, and we only have about one of each serving/prepping utensil, so cross-contamination is inevitable. And I can't tell you how many times expired sauces and partially freeze-burnt food have been served because nobody bothered to actually check the dates like they were supposed to. And the dishes are cleaned poorly too. You might be okay to order food if it's not a busy night, but if the room is full, you're getting food that's past its prime, made with utensils that haven't had a chance to be washed, by someone who doesn't want to be there and has basically been handed a bunch of frozen food and an inaccurate list of cooking times and told to figure it out or to move as fast as possible. Story 60. I did a season in tax prep. Tax prep companies charge per form. An earned income credit is its own form. The poorest working people get the largest amount, which has caused many companies to charge $100 or even more for that one form added to your tax prep. With the software used, it isn't even extra work beyond 30 to 60 seconds worth of questions to the taxpayer. When your return is thousands and the fees come out of it, you don't question the cost of tax prep. Most people with uncomplicated taxes would be better off using at-home software or a local low-income prep service. Also, the training is fast and dirty, and there's a good chance the person doing your taxes barely knows more than you. The IRS isn't scary, you're unlikely to be audited, and even if you are, it's not a big deal unless you're actively lying on your taxes on purpose. Story 61. Instagram influencers are a terrible, terrible use of a company's marketing budget. In 99% of most cases, from micro-influencers right up to those with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, the company spends more on the influencer through direct payment and free product than they make in sales from said influencer. But companies still do it because all their competitors are doing it. And influencers, by and large, are horrible to deal with. I fully appreciate that everyone should understand their worth and not sell themselves short. But when you're gifting them $2,000 worth of product in return for a post on their feed and a swipe up link on their story, and they come back and say they want money on top of that, yeah, you can keep your 10K followers. Then you've got the influencers who contact you and flat out ask for product because they're moving/house refurbishing their bedroom/building a home gym, and rather than spend their own money to do it, they tell companies that just being featured in their picture is payment enough. Story 62. Not really dark or questionable, but I feel like Karens would whinge if they knew about it. But in sushi train establishments, stuff like sashimi is kept at the end of the day. You'd think everything unsold gets thrown out or eaten by the staff, but the uncooked fish gets kept and becomes the next day's cooked fish. So your cooked salmon roll is probably yesterday's salmon sashimi. All refrigerated, of course, but it's standard practice and perfectly safe and healthy. Also, when someone demands a fresh sashimi, we just take one off the belt, put it in the fridge to make it feel cold, then bring it out to them. Unless it's a super dodgy establishment, all sashimi is freshly delivered that morning, and we spend the first hour pulling out all the little bones left in the fillets and chopping it up. There isn't a magic storeroom with somehow fresher fish or a delivery man ready to go catch one and deliver it to the store in demand. And the raw fish rolls/dishes aren't left on the belt more than 30 minutes, and then it's taken off and placed back in the fridge to keep it fresh. No decent establishment leaves the uncooked ones on there going round and round the whole day or for hours. Story 63. I'm a medical scientist fairly high up in my career, with as many publications and citations as some of the long-standing tenured professors. It's not really a dark secret, but scientific publishing is absolutely broken. Before my career, I would have been on Reddit saying, trust the experts, don't question science. Having now worked in science many years, I am massive skeptics of everything published. How is the system broken? Firstly, when you submit a paper, you can suggest reviewers, and peer review is not blind. In other words, you can choose your mates to verify your science is accurate, and they can see you're the author and review it favorably. You pat my back, I'll pat yours. Secondly, funding applications are usually only successful if they are A, have the potential to net a media win for said funders, B, add to an idea that's already been proven. This means if I write an application for something radical, different, against the field narrative, I will never get funded. My living depends on me taking already existing thought and going, here's a little spot on this juicy cake that doesn't already have a cherry on it where I can put mine. I've also seen bad data misrepresented, p-values misinterpreted and abused so hard they should be in a shelter, outlandishly exaggerated conclusions for career benefit and making it through peer review. I've seen esteemed professors spend hundreds of dollars of charity grants on fancy dinners, first-class flights. I've seen scientists taking thousands of dollars in kickbacks from private companies in exchange for helping monetize their ideas. Silence is no less fallible than any other field, and skepticism is good. Phew. Story 64. Lobbyist here. While most lobbyists are just subject matter experts that help congressional staff navigate complex policies on topics like healthcare, etc., some of us work for foreign governments, actively working against U.S. interests and launching misinformation campaigns targeting American voters and media. There's a law called the Foreign Agent Registrations Act, which allows us to do this as long as we report our activities. But the law is very vague and allows our agents to be very creative in that reporting. From puppeting important members of Congress to using AI to steer social media conversations, our industry has been scarily powerful over the last few 6 years. It's a very lucrative job. P.S. I'd be willing to bet 30% to 40% of the trolls you see on this site, in the comments of major news sites, and on social media are Russian, Chinese, and or Turkish-owned bots. Story 65. Most people in my profession work into their late 80s because it's really hard to learn anything else when you're a sailor. And most longtime guys, it's 99.9% male-dominated field in Poland, wouldn't admit it, but they both hate and love this job and would rather leave their wives and kids than stop doing what they're doing. Also, since I'm sailing for Patrol Company, you'd be horrified to hear how much money laundering is going on in it. On an environmental scale, you'd be even more horrified to hear that literal tons of fuel are leaked into the ground every month and year, mostly due to spillage, but some companies just pour unpure or contaminated fuel into the ground, and these places will never see plant growth, at least in our and our kids' lifetimes. Story 66. Most stage concerts are real-time auto-tuned, with really expensive equipments. Other than a select few singers, no one big writes their own song. They have a whole team. Concert venue and setup costs are usually less than 1/8 to 1/3 of the ticket revenue. They can earn a crap ton of money, and show increased costs and easily pays less tax. The concert team is blamed and or fired 90% of the time for any sort of singing problem the singer causes, like forgetting a beat or step. After concert parties are borderline scary with substance abuse, booze, hookers, male and female. More than 60% of the moments when a singer brings someone on stage, or says or does something random, is staged and practiced multiple times in order to look like an average fun person. If you're working with any big celeb on just about any job, you just about always have to sign NDA. So not much is known about their private hobbies, lifestyle, and work style. And whatever sports drink can/bottle they use on stage is a publicity thing. Companies like Monster make water cans which look just like Monster cans, so your favorite performer that always seems to be drinking a particular brand beverage is just gulping down water. Story 67. Group homes for the intellectually and developmentally disabled are rampant with neglect from the top down. Workers get paid crap, and they'll do just enough to not get fired, which is next to nothing since management will only do enough for the houses to stay accredited. And staying accredited just means making sure everything looks spick and span for one day out of the year when the house is being audited. Clients eat like crap because shopping is delegated to low-level staff who are usually poverty-stricken and have horrible eating habits themselves. Fruits and vegetables are almost never consumed by clients. Meals are mostly garbage like frozen lasagna, etc. Clients' bottoms very infrequently get wiped. Showers only happen when someone is visibly soiled. Teeth are very rarely brushed. Therapies that can be skipped without notice are frequently skipped. It's sickening. Story 68. Personal trainer here. For reference, I'm a male in my mid-20s, but what I'm about to say has absolutely held true with female trainers as well. This mostly applies to the low end of the industry, your gyms that cater to the general population. Once you get to the higher end, where the coaches are highly educated professionals and the clients are high-level athletes, this is significantly less common. I won't say totally absent because you just don't know, but realistically, it would be a rare occurrence. It's a pretty well-known fact, and a hugely embarrassing one at that, in the fitness industry that personal trainers will sleep with their clients, regardless of their relationship/marital status. Turns out that when you combine an industry staffed mostly by younger, smooth-talking, and in-shape individuals, it's extremely vain at the low end, with no professional standard, there's literally no barrier to entry, and barely there clothing, as far as female clients go, you have a volatile mix. Factor in how much time you spend together, and it's inevitable that the sessions and conversations become intensely personal. If you are at least somewhat competent and empathetic, I can guarantee that you will become their confidant and a sort of rock in their life. I've had clients come in and train on the day they lose their parent or sibling. I've had some come in and train the day they decided to leave their spouse. It's personal training. You can imagine the connections built when you are there for someone through such difficult times, and the unscrupulous among us look to capitalize on that vulnerability. The lack of any sense of decency or humanity from my coworkers in the face of that vulnerability is actually eye-opening to me as a young adult. It definitely tainted my view of people in general. I thought pretty much everyone knew this, but every client I've told has been absolutely shocked. As a man working in the industry, I have to say most of the clients I see in the morning, I work in an upper middle class suburb, so the morning tends to be a lot of stay-at-home moms, are there to see me, not to work out. People think I'm being arrogant when I say that. No, I've been groped more times than I can count on one hand because my ass is just perfect. I've been told I'm effable by multiple women who are married in an avert attempt to pique my interest. I've been hit on by women twice my age who are bored with what their spouse has to offer. It's disgusting. Can you imagine what would happen to me as a man if I attempted the same things? But I'm supposed to take it all in jest because it's flattering. No, it's not. This is my life. As a doctoral student in the field, first year physical therapy, I take this very seriously. So crapping where I sleep is a no-go, but it doesn't stop them from trying. Fortunately, my bosses are smart. We have cameras installed that cover every angle of the training floor for our protection, and I have a strict policy of not putting my hands on female clients for any reason short of preventing certain injury. Even so, some trainers still get themselves tangled up in bad situations, and I've had to tell someone to slip out the back door on more than one occasion to duck a pissed-off husband that finally figured it out. Now, have I dated a client in my 8 years working in the industry? Yes. I spend 60 to 70 hours a week at work, and I have a confidence there that doesn't come out anywhere else in my life, but I always go into it with the intentions of seriously dating, and it has never been someone who wasn't single. Obviously, I couldn't stop my significant other from having a personal trainer, but it would be highly questionable to me if she insisted on training with someone else who I never meet, multiple times a week, when I'm well qualified to help her myself. Working in the industry has just broken my trust in the people. Too many bad apples. Story 69. I used to be a nuclear power technician on a U.S. Navy submarine. The nuclear engineering community is undermanned worldwide, but the maintenance required for the plants didn't decrease. As a result, much of the required maintenance just doesn't get done. But if you dig into a ship's nuclear engineering records, you'll find records for most or all of the expected maintenance. I would guess at least 25 to 50% of those papers are fake. That work was never done. Everyone knows it. The technicians know it, the ship's engineer knows it, the ship's captain knows it, the Department of Naval Reactors knows it, and none of them care. The U.S. Navy's nuclear power plants have been safe so far, only because decades ago, the original engineers designed them with incredibly large safety factors. Since leaving the Navy, I've worked for the Department of Energy, the International Atomic Energy Agency, NASA, and several private corporations, and I've never seen massive institutionalized falsification of engineering records like I saw in the U.S. Navy. Story 70. If the police need an inside man in certain scenarios, they'll sometimes use someone who's been previously convicted of the crime. So, if they uncover a predator ring and need more information about how to push it towards arrest, they'll plant someone who's already been done for. When a previous criminal is planted, they have to prove that they didn't organize any crime or incite any crime, and that they only went along with what the group was going to do anyway. Otherwise, they could face conviction like the rest of them. This kind of works as a safeguard, as to make sure the cases against the others don't seem fabricated. It also helps keep the informant in check. Obviously, this doesn't sound great, but the idea is if they can plant a predator who isn't allowed to bring more kids in, then there's no extra victims being harmed, and they're getting more information, which will allow them to move in for arrest. I don't know if this is true in other countries, but it is in the UK. To clarify, I'm not a member of the police force, but I studied it at uni for the past 3 years. Story 71. I work for an IT company that operates in US healthcare. If you arrive at ER, there's a good chance you'll use our software. When you're diagnosed with your ailments, we do an eligibility check to see what your insurance will cover as part of the treatment. The obvious end goal is 100% cover, no excess. Your cover may give excess to several providers, and they'll be displayed on screen. Option 1 pays 75%. Option 2 might show 80% cover, and others that may cover the full 100%. The nurse doesn't know the amount until they accept one of the options, and you then agree that's the one you want. Returning to the options and choosing a different way may recalculate the cover and may not provide as good an option again. Our software is legally not allowed to prompt or steer the nurse. The first option isn't necessarily the best. The info is just provided as it is and is up to them to assess. So if you have a really bad accident/disease, whatever, technically you could be 100% covered, but you'll not get it on a technicality. Getting 75% of your cover paid is excellent, but the remainder could cripple the average person financially. As a non-American, I find this process hard to digest. Story 72. Oh, I work at a post office. We have a lot of snobby, rich old people who've decided to build their mansions out in the country. We also have farmers, nice old people, and middle-income workers who were smart when real estate was low. It will never drop that low again. This is about the rich snobs. Sometimes they like to buy a lot of things online. Sometimes they decide to treat the staff like dirt and lay into us for nothing of our own fault. I get it. Sometimes people make mistakes, usually the freight company, which has nothing to do with us. But you don't need to yell at the people on the front end to feel gratified. So sometimes I conveniently don't look at a list which I know they have their parcel on, so they have to come back another day to get it. I also changed the date on it so it looks like it came in on the day they came. Then I can say, it only just came in this morning. Well, confession, it didn't. You were just rude and I decided to make you wait a day longer for your fur coat, Susan. Story 73. AV operators are the most invisible people with the highest access. Most people think we just do concerts and such, but for every concert I operate, I do 10 meetings/business dinners/government plenaries. I once did a high-level Department of Defense meeting where someone said something they apparently shouldn't have said, and instantly everyone had to sign an NDA. Except they completely forgot about me. I've been packing down gear and had the building close because they thought everyone had left. I once had to loudly announce myself because some performers stripped down naked 5 meters to my left to get their body paint done. If you wear black and stand behind a console, you suddenly become the least interesting person in the room. Story 74. I commented earlier about working at a library. Here's something else. Most of the materials that get donated go right in the trash/recycling. You wouldn't believe the garbage people would bring. Kids' books ripped to shreds, coloring books that were already colored, solved puzzle books, books covered with mold and mildew. The worst, that smell stays in your nose all day. Do not donate old textbooks or computer manuals. Right into the trash they go. Nobody wants your Windows 95 for dummies. Anything time relevant gets trashed. A travel guide from 5 years ago is worthless. Basically, we only want books we can sell, i.e., things people want. Nobody wants your garbage. We only want the classics, books from known authors, and anything that appeared on bestseller lists. So just quick side note, but this kind of triggered me a little bit. It's just a little pet peeve of mine. People who dump their garbage off on other organizations that are collecting donations and things like that. There is a distinct difference between a used product and something that absolutely belongs in the garbage. So yeah, moldy books and travel guides from the 1980s, stuff like that, just throw it away. Like, why are you going through the extra effort to transport your garbage to someone else and pass it off as a donation? Does that honestly make you feel better about yourself? Story 75. Hacking into softwares is very usually, if a professional wants your data, they have your data. The place where it gets dark is the fact that people use such data to change mindsets, persuade people to do things, and more. It's also thought that people are being tested with such data to simulate our brain. This means people lose control on themselves. They're living human experiments against their will. Bonus. Do you know how stuff like gynecology and modern medicine are so advanced? Gynecology was earlier practiced by ripping apart women without anesthesia and checking it. Modern medicine is so advanced because of many unethical experiments like the ones done by the Nazis, and vaccines under development are tested on people in poorer countries to see the side effects. Story 76. A lot of nurses over here steal medication for themselves/families, sneaking a few strips of meds here and there, mainly opioids or benzodiazepines. Some even take them at work. I'm not in the profession myself, but have friends who are, and apparently this happens regularly. Some of the worst even take medication they were meant to give the patient, then just write up that they took it. If they are elderly and confused, then they have no idea what they have or haven't taken. It's pretty disgusting, actually, and I was shocked to say the least when I learned how common this is and how many people are risking their jobs for a few pills. Story 77. Travel agencies hack the flight availability, making the reservations on non-existent seats, because they're all sold out, getting the net price for a lot cheaper and selling it for some $100 below online price. For example, if a flight online is $1,200 USD, some travel agency will get the same flight illegally for $700 USD and sell it for $1,150 USD. So customer thinks they're getting a nice deal, 50 USD discount, and the travel agents get 450 USD profit. And I'm not talking about waivers, etc. This is something illegal, and the company I learned this from calls it flight cutting because of the procedure, how it's done. If the airline catches such action from the travel agency, the agency get major fines. So for those who are having trouble checking in at airports and having airport workers tell them that their flight is messed up, one seat sold to 2 people, now you know why. Most likely the site/company you got the flight from are effing over the airline. Story 78. In furniture delivery, talking desks, closets, beds, it's not uncommon to have underpaid workers with overtime. Being so unsatisfied with their jobs, they won't care half of the times to treat your stuff with care so things may break. After the stuff went through many hands and the delivery man gets it, the good may already be damaged and it won't even be the delivery guy's fault. If he sees there's damage though, he might not tell you about it. In some firms, there's a policy where you get less money if a lot of damage gets reported on your deliveries. So most people feel like they're better off not telling the client about a damaged piece of furniture. By damage, I mean usually small scratches and stuff, but still, the client paid for undamaged goods and has the right to it. There are honest people who will tell you, but you should always check the new furniture that arrives, and most companies will refund any damage. The new delivery, though, may take over several months sometimes, so you're better off to ask for a lower price instead or just buy your furniture from trusted places. Also, always double check what the service implies. Some deliveries including carrying the sofa to your room, some include unpacking, and some even putting it together. So like policemen, the furniture guys may try to slip a harmless seeming question like, "So if you want to leave it here, maybe it's best to keep the packaging, right?" This would avoid them a great amount of trouble, so they're more than happy when a client refuses one of these services voluntarily. Now that I sow some mistrust, let me also say that when somebody puts a closet together in your house, give them their space. Nobody likes to be spied upon for 2 hours. Just check the end result thoroughly. A little bit of trust has to be there. Story 79. Nursing. There's a decent amount of nurses who purposefully give patients more of a medication than they're prescribed, typically controlled drugs. There is a lot of reasons given. Two most common are 1. To sedate an aggravating patient, and 2. To control a patient's pain when doctor orders a pain med that isn't strong enough. It's called a nurse dose. Also, the most common reason a nurse loses their license now is controlled drug diversion. They release a magazine in my state every so often, and the end pages are just nurses who lost their license recently and why. Story 80. If a high school has an A or B rating, it's almost always because they force underperforming, and potentially underperforming, students to drop out or push them to a different school. That's why every district has at least one school with a D or below. That's where they send the underperformers, so the rest of the district looks good. Allow me to confirm your fears. This absolutely usually takes the form of racial segregation. I just started working for a charter school, so I'm not sure about where I currently work, but my wife works for the school in her district where they dump the students. The most egregious case was at the school she's student taught at, where they didn't allow a student from Venezuela to enroll in high school after he completed 8th grade at their school because they were trying to boost their ratings. They wrote on his form, "Went back to Mexico," even though the kids still lived there. That school went from a D to an A in a single year. Story 81. I've been in the dance industry for 30 years. Got a few that may surprise people. Russian ballet schools make children audition unclothed. Kids as young as 3 or 4, naked, in front of a panel of judgy dance educators. They will poke, prod, bend, and stretch them. The theory is so they can see their hips, body alignment, etc. Still considered a totally normal practice. There are documentaries that are essentially CP that I had to watch while getting my degree. Foot breaking was a common practice in the US even into the 80s. It may still be common elsewhere. To get the high arches desired for point work, ballet teachers would break their prepubescent students' feet with hammers, bricks, or by slamming them indoors. My first ballet teacher had this done to her as a child, and she had severe issues in her 40s and 50s because of it. Point shoes cost $60 to $150 per pair, and yet may last for one performance, if that. Students just starting point may wear theirs put in a few weeks. This is why there is a stigma that ballet, like figure skating or hockey or horseback riding, is a rich people's endeavor. If people are interested, I'll dig up more. This was just off the top of my head. Story 82. Audio engineer here. So many of us have a fader, knob, or otherwise that actually does absolutely nothing. Whether the artist asks for something silly or impossible, we make adjustments to that useless knob and try not to laugh while the artist vibes out in approval of our adjustments to absolutely nothing. Works every time. Placebo is amazingly potent when it comes to audio. We're always fighting against the poor judgment of artists/singers, etc., who don't understand how much of a lack of subjectivity can taint your perspective on how good or bad your song sounds. Our job is basically knowing how to not let your ears trick you into thinking your hearing sounds good when it actually doesn't. As an audio engineer myself, I can totally co-sign on this and say that yes, our boards in fact do have a knob that does absolutely nothing, and we will often resort to it anytime someone on stage is, being a Karen for the day. And just as this poster shared, it usually shuts them up. So yeah, placebo effect is definitely the way to go. Story 83. I'm aspiring to be in the canine training and behavior business, so here's my 2 cents. Dog training is unlicensed, meaning anyone and everyone can call themselves a dog trainer without having any education. Even if a trainer is licensed, there's no guarantee that their training is actually effective or correct. Take Cesar Millan, for example, who got an honorary degree despite having no schooling. Literally one of the most known dog trainers in the world. Despite being a dog trainer, Milan has never gotten any sort of education regarding canine behavior. He also practices and promotes harmful training methods that have been proven to be ineffective and even abusive by actual licensed canine behaviorists. A good way to see if your trainer is going to be ineffective, ask them about their thoughts on Caesar Milan. If they like him, well, there you go. Story 84. In the mental health field, there's a lot of stigma and ignorance among providers about some forms of mental illness. Many clinicians openly complain to each other about having to work with people who have psychosis or personality disorders, and those clients are often treated poorly and face discrimination within the institution where they're trying to seek help. Almost no one knows how to diagnose or treat dissociative disorders. People with these disorders frequently end up diagnosed with the most heavily stigmatized disorders: borderline personality disorder and/or treatment-resistant schizophrenia. If you're dealing with any of these symptoms, don't let this deter you from seeking help. There are good people out there in the mental health field. Just be aware that they can't all be a good fit. Some are a-holes, and sometimes you'll meet 5, 10, or 20 wrong helpers before you find the right one for you. Don't give up. You deserve the life that's on the other side of getting good support. I recommend checking the ISSTD provider listings worldwide, Psychology Today, therapist listings, US/more, and ask friends who have received mental health treatment if they like their counselor/psychiatrist/agency. These can help you make informed decisions about who you trust with your mental health. Story 85. I'm a biochemist who's worked in pharmaceutical manufacturing. I've done the research to take a drug from the bench level to large-scale manufacturing and have written the SOPs, standard operating procedures, for manufacturing and safety testing. So these days, there's a lot of suspicion about GMO foods in our food chain. I have friends who order specific foods from non-GMO verified companies and say that GMO would never pass their lips. That's all fine and dandy, but one thing these people do not know is that many of their pharmaceuticals, from insulin to blood pressure meds to antidepressants, are made using GMO organisms. It's standard operating procedure to take the genes that either make the drug directly, like insulin or factor VIII, or a precursor of a drug in massive quantities, and are purified to homogeneity during the manufacturing process. This has actually made drugs safer because when we used to purify insulin and factor VIII for hemophilia from human sources, and there was always a risk that a new virus or endotoxin could be co-purified with the drug that turns out to be bad for humans. An example is factor VIII. In the 80s, we gave a bunch of hemophilic kids AIDS because the HIV virus was, which we were about to discover, was still in the purified factor VIII. GMO is widely used for pharmaceutical manufacturing, and when I tell my anti-GMO friends, they just shrug it off. Story 87. Walmart posts welfare information in food bank/closing drive locations in the employee break room. In the mid-2010s, a 25-cent per hour raise at a corporate Wendy's was considered fantastic. Even the best and most loyal workers would struggle to get it. Any minor infraction would bump you down to a 10-cent annual raise, and that's if you're lucky. They use meat that's up to 8 days old in their chili. There's no shift regulation. The manager can assign any shift to you at any time, as long as there exists a 6-hour break in between. The manager would on occasion snipe workers who got on his nerves by giving them a closing shift on a Sunday night, followed by an opening shift on Monday. There was no overtime allowed, no exceptions. The manager would trim all hours worked over 40, sometimes as much as 2 or 3 hours per week. KFC used to carry a barbecue sandwich that contained meat manually pulled off unsold chicken breasts. The next day, it would be soaked in the sauce mixture and reheated. Story 88. I don't know if this is a secret, but maybe I can offer a little more insight. It is a little dirty. So, my mom is a specialist physician who owns a private medical practice, infusion center plus wound care clinic, and I have worked there many summers doing insurance billing. As a specialist, you get patients referred to you by other doctors. For example, a foot doctor finds an infection on a patient, then refers the patient to see an infectious disease specialist. So once you go in to see said patient, if they need further treatment, you give them your card and tell them to call your practice to set up an appointment. As a physician, you don't get paid till you bill the insurance company. If a patient has Medicare, there are fixed, much lower rates for said procedure. You get significantly more money from patients with private insurances. A private practice has the option to turn away whoever they want. Therefore, they can turn away Medicare patients since it's not worth the time/effort as compared to a patient with private insurance. There's a minimum quota of Medicare patients that have to hit every quarter, but after that, every Medicare patient gets refused treatment. They have to go find someone else that will accept their insurance. And the Medicare patients that we have to legally treat get the worst appointment/treatment times. Basically, even if your doctor refers a specialist that they feel is the right physician for the job to come in and consult on you, there's a high chance that they won't continue treatment if you're on Medicare. They will tell you to go find a different, possibly worse specialist to continue treatment. It's just not financially worth the time. Story 89. It's probably going to get buried, but I'm going to give my experiences anyway because A, I have had a very varied working life with no less than 7 different roles over the last 15 years, some held at the same time, and B, good chance to get some stuff off my chest. I'll do each job I've had. 1. I used to work as a pie seller in a van. Basically, I would show up to a sporting event, a concert, a festival, or sometimes just to an office park and set up shop selling hot takeaway food like pies, pizza, hot dogs, burgers, etc. One thing we sold was curry sauce. The pot it was cooked in was nigh on impossible to clean without industrial strength bleach, ultra tough brushes, and some serious elbow grease. I would clean it, but it was never completely clean. There was always a thick rind of curry, usually at the top where the sauce rested, that had been there a few weeks. 2. I worked as a barman for an extremely busy city center pub. This city hosted the national football team, multiple top division football clubs, 2 large purpose-built concert and event centers, and is a tourist hotspot. Also within 4 minutes walking distance of 2 universities and 3 different colleges. So yeah, busy. During our very, very busy time, we would pre-make drinks that we anticipated would be popular. Festival in summer? Cider. Big football game? Beer. Boy band having a concert? Cocktails. Hours ahead of time and place them on the back bar so that we could just grab them, chuck ice in, or top up where applicable, and give them to the customer. This isn't so bad for cocktails, but sometimes people would be drinking beer that had been sat out for 3+ hours, but they were usually too wasted to notice or care. 3. I worked as a bouncer for a night bar. This isn't really questionable or dark, but at the start of my shift, I would go into both bathrooms and sprinkle a little cleaning spray on the toilet seats, basins, lids, sinks, sideboard, etc. Anywhere that someone could snort something off. Reason being, it would make their coke or whatever it was stick to the surface. I personally don't give a crap if you do drugs, but people high on coke are hard to deal with when they get angry, and I didn't want the aggro. 4. I was a cold caller selling double glazing and cavity wall insulation. I was not allowed to hang up until the other person did, no matter what I said, no matter how angry I got. The one exception was if they started literally screaming or blew a dog whistle down the phone. Even if they said no multiple times, I had to stick at it until the bitter end. 5. I worked as a call center agent in retentions for a major telecoms provider. I had the power and ability to, if necessary, apply incredible discounts on a customer's premiums if they wanted to leave. Most of the time, I could save 40% on an 80 p.m. bill, sometimes as high as 60%, and on one occasion, I even gave a customer 80% off. It all depended on their subscription, their length of service, and frankly, how nice they were to me. Nicer you were and more genuine, more likely I was to give you a sweet deal. 6. I worked as a sailor. I was drunk about a third of the time, even on shift or on watch. I wasn't standing there drinking on duty, but I had been drinking the 6 hours immediately preceding duty, and I was far from the only one. A lot of ships out there are moving with a drunk at the helm, or in the engine room, or cooking scran. 7. IT support. We charge by the minute, and just for picking up the phone to help you, it costs you 10 minutes flat rate. Even if I resolve your issue in under a minute, you're going to pay the full 10, and it goes up in increments of 10. If it takes me 11 minutes, you're getting charged 20. This isn't hard and fast. I have some power to alter this, but it's also on a very tight leash. Sometimes I would knock off time if I should have fixed something sooner. Like, if it took me an hour, but really I should have and could have had it done in 40 minutes, I'll only charge you the 40 minutes. On the flip, if you're an asshat, you're being charged for every second. You needed my services for 10 minutes and 1 second? You're getting charged for 20 minutes. I only did this for people who were disrespectful, though. The arsehole tax, I call it. So this guy certainly gets around. He just gave us 7 jobs that are in no way, shape, or form related. So, man, this guy's like having a midlife crisis throughout his life, it seems. But appreciate the insider information. Story 90. Elderly people in nursing homes are heavily medicated, to the point where it's a chemical restraint. They're also given very high amounts of morphine. They're basically addicts, and due to the nature of the drugs they're given, will go into withdrawal an hour before their next dose is due. This is painful mentally and physically. Also, the injections or drip of morphine given to supine patients at the end of life to, quote, make them comfortable is actually a form of euthanasia. Large amounts of morphine given to someone in a supine position will cause them to stop breathing. I think most people who cannot get up anymore end up dying of fluid in their lungs, and morphine causes decreased lung function. Also, because of privatization and lack of interest, many sick people get minimal care and are neglected, and many die alone. This was pre-COVID. Now it's worse. Story 91. Only 30% of ESL teachers working in training schools in China are actually doing so legally. To do so legally isn't that high a bar. 1. Native speaker or graduated from a university in an English-speaking country. 2. Bare minimum, hold a bachelor's. 3. Have a TESOL or TEFL certificate and or 2 years of experience. 4. Passport valid for a minimum of 6 months to get the correct visa. Z visa. Over my years in that industry, I've known folks working on tourist and student visas and plenty non-native speakers working for them, alongside a lot of teachers who are doing it as a secondary job, despite legally/contractually not being allowed to do so. Story 92. I worked for a mobile/Facebook gaming company. We added a lottery-style feature to one of our games, except for instead of counting tickets and giving everyone a random chance, they would use data to make sure the only people rewarded weren't potential spenders. By that, I mean that they would only give it to people, manually mind you, that were very likely to never spend money in the game. This way, spenders never benefited, and we were actively encouraged to spend more, even if that meant for more lottery tickets. At a different company, previous to law changes, our random chance drops had percentages displayed that were nowhere near the actual value. Like, you have a 5% chance to get awesome things from a crate. It was actually closer to 0.1%. When people complained about the loot percentages and actually made a living doc for people to add percentages into it, the community outreach team made fake comments to skew the statistics. These are atrocious, but really it's nearly as bad as all the typical casino tactics that free-to-play games, especially mobile, use. They literally sit around talking about how to steal the savings from your grandparents and laugh at how they successfully got someone sent to jail for embezzling hundreds of thousands from their company so they could buy stupid crap in a mobile game. Story 93. Not me, but my mom. She used to work at a hospital with some pretty horrible people. I'm not exaggerating. Often, people in her department would watch the cameras of outpatients' rooms when people were changing in their hospital gowns. They would make fun of people when they were naked. These two women had a favorite pastime of calling fat people blobs. Saying terrible crap was just something they did all the time. They would literally make fun of everyone. Also, they'd let family members, friends, and people from other departments come into rooms with HIPAA-sensitive information. Most medical workers are fantastic. They're a different type of people. They see crap regular people don't. They're almost always in a saving people mindset, but there are always bad apples in a bunch. They're not excluded here. Story 94. I'm sure this goes for other cuisines too. In a sushi bar, ordering a spicy whatever, such as a spicy tuna roll, means you're ordering tuna that was starting to look bad, starting to smell bad, like really bad, mixed with all the tuna that didn't look or smell good enough to be served by itself in the first place, smothered with garlicky spicy mayonnaise so it's less obvious, which is fine by the way if you're paying less, but usually it's sold as a premium item, and people love it. Beware when strong spices are mixed with raw fish. Story 95. Disaster restoration. When someone writes an estimate to repair damage to your house, they'll often add fluff to the estimate, items that don't necessarily need to be done, so that they make more money in the long run. For example, Your laundry room flooded, and the mitigation team had to cut out some drywall to make sure the water didn't spread any farther upward. The estimate should include replacing the drywall and repainting the area that was replaced. The person writing the estimate may include repainting the entire room, 2 coats, when the only painting that needs done is 1 coat on the replaced drywall. Not so much questionable or dark, but something homeowners should be aware of when approving an estimate. Story 96. I'm a little late to the party here, but I work as a dental tech in a dental lab. I make the teeth you need after you go to the dentist, and boy oh boy, do the grand majority of dentists suck at their job. I've worked at 3 bigger production labs in the US, so this isn't really an isolated incident. It's all over the country. Impressions with distortions / where the impression material isn't even fully set or sent in all the time. Intraoral scans where the patient's bite / occlusion is wildly off, and there's scanning noise all over the prepped tooth and/or contacting teeth. We get wrong / bad / no info too often, and we're told to just go with it. And if the dentist you see still uses wax for the bite registration, get up out of the chair and run. Story 97. Restaurant worker here. We reuse stuff we shouldn't all the time. All the pads of butter and jelly you didn't use get put on the next table. Yes, even still. I've also worked places that save the open butters to cook with, reuse garnishment, serve food after the entire plate got dropped on the floor. I also ate one of your fries. Thanks. But in about 2 decades of restaurant work, I've never seen anybody intentionally F with someone's food, ever. Even the greasiest diner I've worked at would have fired you on the spot if they caught you doing that crap. Story 98. Plasma blood plasma processor here. I work in a place where people sell their plasma. We tell them it's for a good cause and they can make money, which is true, but what they don't know is even though they're getting paid $30 to $60 per donation, the company actually sells every donation for about $900 to $1,200 to pharmaceutical companies. I wish I'd never learned this, because now I get bummed out when I see a guy be excited to get $40 for his donation, when I know what he just gave is worth 27.5 times that. Story 99. I worked for a radio station for a while after college. Here's how we handled contests and requests. Contests where we say we're looking for caller 7, I would answer the phones until I heard someone who sounded excited. Usually they were around the 7th caller, so you still have to call quick and get through, but I needed to pick someone that would sound good on the radio and actually sound happy to be winning. Can't give a prize away to someone and have them sound like Eeyore when they win. That's bad radio. Also, when you request a song, we are not playing the song unless we were already planning on playing it. Every hour of programming is done down to basically plus or minus 3 seconds. We have to get out of each talk section right on time, and we can't switch out a song we were planning to play with the song you requested because it will throw off everything. If you want your request to go through, pick a song we have in heavy rotation. You might get your shout out. If you ask to hear some deep cut or B-side, I'll say we'll try to get that in for you, and I won't even write it down. Story 100. If a new car built by my company leaves Chicago traveling west at 60 miles per hour, and the rear differential locks up, and the car crashes and burns with everyone trapped inside, does my company initiate a recall? You take the population of vehicles in the field, A, and multiply it by the probable rate of failure, B, then multiply the result by the average cost of an out-of-court settlement. C. A times B times C equals X. This is what it will cost if we don't initiate a recall. If X is greater than the cost of a recall, we recall the cars and no one gets hurt. If X is less than the cost of a recall, we don't do one. Story 101. Medical technologist. I test your blood when the doctor orders lab work. The amount of mislabels and analytical errors are staggering. Our goal is 1%, but if you're testing 1,000 patients, that's 10 errors a day. A nurse in an ER I worked at mislabeled a specimen. They admitted the patient due to her blood work. I caught it because I look into the inconsistency in the changes in values. I was the only tech in the lab that lab was willing to go the extra mile and look into possible mislabels. Now that person was charged a hospital overnight stay for an error and they will never know. Story 102. I work in aviation, which in and of itself is a very honest, safe, and transparent industry. I can't stress to you all how we're encouraged to report faults and speak up if something seems off. But as an AME, aircraft maintenance engineer, think car mechanic but for airplanes, we have one little secret. We don't put our name or initials on our tools for one reason. If we somehow forget a tool and it causes a problem, AOG, ATB, RTG, or worse, with the plane, it's harder to trace it to the mechanic who forgot a tool. Don't get me wrong, we double check and triple check our tools and work areas when we finish our job. We treat every plane as though our mom, dad, SO, child will be aboard that plane. We also don't hesitate to ground a plane if we think it's unsafe. We take a lot of pride in our work and our record for safety. We just have that one secret. Story 103. Criminal defense / public defender / appointed counsel. Leaning on clients to take plea offers. People do not realize how much influence a defense attorney has over whether a client will accept or reject a plea offer. The aspect that has made it into popular culture is the innocent person who takes a plea deal to get out of jail or can't refuse an offer on a serious crime because they face ridiculous exposure. A lot of times 10 plus years or a life sentence, if they're convicted. But it's much more than this. I can take a case and meet with a client and pitch it up so that 95% of clients will take the plea offer. I can take the same case with the same set of facts and pitch it up so that 95% of clients would reject the plea offer and try the case. This isn't about any natural gift of persuasion. It's inherent to the dynamic between the lawyer and client. There's always the 5% on each side. I'm going to plea out no matter what. I'm going to take it to trial no matter what. But for most cases, there's enough gray area that you're not going to get a bar complaint or an ineffective assistance claim for recommending that the client take a plea offer. Your client generally isn't going to question you either. Typically, you meet one-on-one with a client. You're the only expert at the table, and if you say it's looking bad, they need to take this offer or it's a no-brainer. The client will almost always listen to you. For the lion's share of cases, this doesn't matter because most reasonable professionals would assess it the same way. But where the power can be scary is you could have a lawyer who's overworked, or they don't want to get on a judge's crap list for taking too many cases to trial, or they didn't look into the case as much as they should have, or even something as simple as they double booked their calendar that day and they don't want to have to ask to continue the case. The client in that situation can sometimes be getting advice through a lens that may not be fully aligned with their best interests. Also, remember that just because a person did it doesn't mean it always makes sense to take a plea. State may have problems proving it. And also, just because there's a plea offer doesn't mean that it makes sense to take it. E.g., if the offer is to plead to all accounts and he or she has a bad criminal history, they're getting stroked either way, so it oftentimes doesn't make sense to plea in that situation. The number one way that I see this occur is attorneys pushing plea bargains more to move a case along, and because it's the path of least resistance and almost never the other way around. E.g., an attorney pushing a client into a trial they didn't want. I'll never forget an attorney who pled out a guy to a mandatory 10-year sentence when that was the only indicted count. The judge had no decision. Upon a conviction, he could sentence the defendant to not less than 10 years and not more than 10 years. All the time was mandatory. Upon the plea, he couldn't sentence him any differently. The client pled out to it, which makes no sense because even if you assess the chance of acquittal at 1%, you should still strongly advise the client to take the case to trial. To this day, I cannot understand it except by thinking that the attorney was being lazy and pitched up a trial to the client as a waste of time. If you're ever in this situation, if I was giving advice as to how to make sure your attorney is doing his or her job, I would recommend 1. Get a copy of your discovery, read it, understand it, and discuss it in detail with your attorney. 2. Make sure you understand all the elements of the offense you're being charged with. Ask your attorney to go over the statutes and each of the elements of the offense. 3. Ask for an assessment of likely sentence if you plea out the case. Ask for an assessment of likely sentence if you lose at trial. Ask what the attorney estimates your chances of acquittal are. 4. Remember that the most common pressures are to plea cases out. They're usually soft pressures, like a judge who doesn't like trials or an attorney who has too many cases. 5. In doing all the foregoing, remember to be respectful and non-confrontational. Attorneys are people too, and the last thing you want is your attorney to be consciously or unconsciously pissed off at you because you're a thorn in their side. I want to emphasize that 95% of the time, attorneys have very good reasons to advise you to accept a plea offer, and you should listen to what your attorney is saying. I think that the vast majority of public defense / court-appointed counsel work is extremely good and very regularly see public pretenders far outperform retained counsel. But you really do need to make sure you're asking the right questions and have a good understanding of your case before agreeing to a plea offer. Edited to add. Also, what's the gigantic check on this? A judge asking the criminal defendant during the plea hearing whether they're satisfied with their attorney's advice and competence. The problem is that the defendant is a layperson and frankly may not have a great idea at all about whether they received competent advice. How ridiculous would it be if I got advice from a professional chef about how to make risotto? I had to turn that meal into Gordon Ramsay, and then Ramsay asked me if I'm satisfied with the advice I got from the chef. I don't know Gordon, I'm not the chef. He seemed competent enough to me, but to be honest, my knowledge base of risotto is centered around your screaming about how poorly they're cooked on Hell's Kitchen. That's a lot of information to take in. I honestly don't even understand half of what I just read, but I would definitely hire you to be my attorney so that I don't have to worry about all the crap that you just spent 2.5 pages of this script rambling about. That's why you make the big bucks. Story 104. In pre-COVID litigation practice, the number of practically unnecessary court appearances. Let's take, for example, an average case. Every 1 to 3 months, the court is going to want an update on what's happening. In most cases, this is unnecessary because the attorneys will handle discovery without the need for guidance and will tell the court what they need. So anyway, the case lasts 2 years, let's say. That means 8 to 24 court appearances. Maybe it's in a court that's a 2-hour drive from my office. So my day consists of going to the office, looking at recent pleadings and correspondence to make sure that everything is freshly in my mind in case the judge wants to know something, driving 2 hours, waiting half hour for my case to get called, because 37 cases are set for management at the same time, and they get called in order. 2 to 3 minutes of standing in front of a judge to say, yes, we've taken these 3 depositions and requested medical records. Yes, we're still on pace. No, we're not ready to put an end date on discovery or schedule a trial quite yet. Sure, we're available in a week to talk again. See you then. And then 2 hours driving home, followed by a letter to the client explaining what, if anything, of significance happened. That's probably 5 to 6 hours of billing, plus 240 miles of mileage claim, which is entirely unnecessary or could be handled by a 1-minute status phone call with the judge. If only our courts weren't so resistant to changing inefficient practices. In total, my client, an insurance company usually, ends up paying in excess of $1,500 for a day trip to a small regional city where nothing of value gets done. But it's something that I have to do because the judge says so. So while in some cases, where the court is local and only requires periodic check-ins, case management might only cost a few $1,000s total. It's completely conceivable for a case to have hundreds of thousands of dollars in absolutely unnecessary legal fees, where you have multiple attorneys traveling to tell a judge that they're still working on the case once a month for a few years while the case is pending. And that cost is passed on to you in the form of insurance premiums. The insurance companies can't easily stop it, nor can the attorneys. It's the judges who have the power. Eliminating or limiting this waste should be a major issue in judicial campaigns. Story 105. Ambulance companies and medical transports are made to be very, very easy to agree to something you don't know the gravity of which you're agreeing to. In an emergency and heat of the moment, it's easy to sign someone's paper or laptop. Bam, $15K transport for what exactly? Don't sign crap. You're stressed, you're hurt, you're pissed. You aren't in a state to be agreeing to anything legally. Ambulance rides can cost thousands and tens of thousands for long-distance transfers, especially if you're in a rural area. If you have a stubbed toe and a doc says, we don't have an ortho here, but there's one 4 hours away, you don't need a effing ambulance ride to get there if you're medically stable and understand the risks of self-transport. This goes for all medical bills and charts. I want to see an itemized receipt of the cost of non-emergent treatment before I receive it, and so should you. Story 106. We experience secondary trauma a lot in the finance, accounting, banking, and legal estate planning professions. Seeing clients you've worked with for years age, lose their faculties, then die, or assisting them after losing a spouse/partner. Visiting clients in hospice or hospital to ensure their estate plan is in order. Family and friends fighting over inheritances. Self-unalivings, child passings, elder abuse, contentious divorces, you name it. All the painful and often ugly aspects of life end up on our desks, and it's up to us to navigate these situations without any real support or expertise. I'm good with numbers and people, but I'm not a grief counselor or therapist. I deal with at least a dozen deaths per year of people I've known for more than a decade and am used to seeing or talking to every few months. It weighs on me heavily. Story 107. Oil and gas, groundwater contamination, hydraulic fracturing. I spent many years evaluating oil and gas wells. If you're concerned about facing contaminating your groundwater, I hate to tell you, but any well can contaminate, and it doesn't need to be phrased. A well can contaminate when the wellbore integrity fails, which is in the cement and casing. This could cause a hole in the casing, not enough cement or poorly bonded cement. The industry has tools to measure wellbore integrity, but the standards in most states are so low, they only require techniques that are 50 plus years old to say the integrity is good. These old techniques miss many common issues that can cause contamination. Many operators don't want to know their integrity is bad, so they do the bare minimum to satisfy the state. So if you have an issue with groundwater contamination, it had nothing to do with phrasing and everything to do with a wellbore that had poor integrity. Story 108. Servers in restaurants prior to COVID-19 never really washed their hands properly. At best, most just use some hot water and dry their hands off after bussing tables and so forth. I never saw anyone pre-COVID-19 do the whole thing with hot water, lather, etc. while singing happy birthday or whatever. Just a quick rinse for 5 to 10 seconds to get the stickiness off and back onto the floor, most of the time without even using soap. To be fair, once COVID-19 hit, while we were still open, that changed immediately and everyone was good about washing. This was in every restaurant I've worked in for the last 20 years, across 3 different states, so it's not really an isolated phenomena. Story 109. If you're buying online, especially around Christmas, your item isn't always a brand spanking new item straight from the manufacturer. The item has sat in a warehouse for sometimes years and is touched countless times and sometimes even used, returned, then put back in inventory. Vendor compliance associates are required to open up merchandise and do quality checks. There are times a customer will return something because it looked used and will still put it back into circulation. Sometimes associates will sample items such as lotions. And we definitely sniff all your candles. Story 110. I worked at a gas booth/kiosk for a few years, and instead of pressure washing or properly cleaning the ground every night, the sackers would just run a water hose over it. Why is this a problem? Oh, simple. Water and oil don't mix. Trying to wash gasoline/oil off of the cement ground by just running water on it resulted in an extremely slippery surface. I've witnessed 3 people slip and fall out there during my time there. I also had a coworker get put on medical leave because he slipped and fell on his back out there. Oh, and those windshield cleaners that are set up at gas stations, the ones with squeegees stuck in some cleaning fluid, I'd recommend not using those. You're better off. Okay, so according to this poster, these guys were out there every night using a hose to wash away the gasoline. So at one point, was someone going to step up and say something? Like, why are people getting injured on the job and having to pull workers' comp and medical leave and all that stuff? Like, why is this an every night thing without anyone saying, like, hey, this is not a good idea. This doesn't work scientifically. Just an interesting cycle of ignorance there. Story 111. I work in a social care setting for adults with learning disabilities in the UK. The majority of the workers are very unintelligent and accidentally mentally abuse and frustrate the people we support, forcing cultural norms onto them, e.g. saying please and thank you, even though they clearly do not understand it. Routines have been developed in many of the people we support from current or previous care malpractice, where they are now self-harming, /can't brush their teeth effectively, /even not wearing underwear. The care setting is minimum wage and no qualifications needed. People accidentally let this happen without even active thought onto it. Story 112. What a complete and utter crap show the domain industry is. I had cases of CP, ISIS, revenge adult films, you name it. Called the police and there's absolutely F all they can do about it. It was always boiling down to the same conversation. Who reported it? A guy in Sweden. Who owns the domain? It's under a fake name registered in Russia. That's out of our jurisdiction. Right then. Story 113. High-level IT support. Not the kind that deals with customers, the kind that deals with premium users from our customers. I live and die by documentation. Basically, I document everything, and I attach notes to the client's file. We use extensive documentation, especially if you're drunk, SH people, and or have things like, I jizz under the keyboard, and then I hope one of the sexy trainees gets to clean it. Our managers read this crap. Our managers' managers read that crap. We have our own codes for serial beater, effing retard, HD full of adult films, serial complainer, overpaid, possible industrial spy, menstruation dates. If it results in screaming matches with trainees and verbal abuse, it goes on to the customer status. Women can get their periods and not turn into effing cowards. Wrecked a server, note down everything he says, don't do jack crap, and send the ticket to a supervisor, young adult male/female at home, gamer, and the dreaded status ticket 69. This means that a customer got the home phone number, OPR private number from a tech supporter. And Order 69 is when he passed that number on to other workers to get around calling tech support. Formally, we're required to treat them like any other customer, but informally, you do that once, you gain a year of bad crap. Your trouble tickets make it all the way down the stack. You get the crappy replacement PCs. You get randomly chosen for a trainee to look over your internet usage and see which sites you like so we can blacklist selectively. Very technical, etc. And, trust me when I say, the algorithm to randomly pick an anonymized user is completely fair, as it has a 69% probability to pick the status 69 people. Mind you, Barbara, she may scream at me because she has had her period and is in a rotten mood, but the next time she calls me, she's cool. Helen, she may be 60 and only here because she's bored, but you know what? I'll drink a cup of coffee with her, and she's perfect to send trainees to that need to learn customer service. Those notes can disappear or be appended. But the status 69s? Everyone has had a status 69. They gave out their work phone number because they wanted to make a client super satisfied, or their cell, and then got calls at 2 a.m. about what to do if... It's a mistake everyone makes. I teach my trainees to say, if anybody asks for their number, that I order them to use carrier animals because it's more secure. They have pictures of a ferret with a backpack and a raven with a scroll case, if anyone asks. But if a status 69 is there, you can informally treat him like the human garbage he is. Drop his call due to a power fluctuation, put him on hold for hours, and if he passes the direct number on to other people, you pass his phone numbers to Scientology, or list him as single and ready to mingle. The quickest way to ruin your day is to take a number to bypass the call center and land directly at the techs. The call center is there for a reason. The reason is that every techie worth his weight has ways and means to get a number in the books of Indian call center scammers and other people like that. And we're not shy to use it if you don't wipe that attitude off your face. If you pass that crap around, we're not bound to keep your extension a secret. If for whatever reason you've been given a direct number, treasure the crap out of it. Treat it like a private number of a friend or a crush. Only call it sober, and you shall be helped. Call the call center too, but only if you've not been helped in the call center shall you dig out the number. If you call a techie's direct number and then go, "You helped me so much, I'll give you your direct number onwards." Have fun when every Peter, Jim, and Bob from Calcutta have your number on speed dial, and for some inexplicable reason, it gets patched through. Story 114. Software engineer here. You know that app/website/program you just love using? Let me enlighten you on how that's made a little bit. I've worked in a few industries as a software engineer. Staffing, freelance web design, insurance, government, building automation, and this has been the case everywhere. So basically, we work with a team of engineers, some small, some large, and some of those people are not so smart. Think about the kid who ate glue writing code for your favorite app. They generally end up writing absolute crap code that will sneak its way into the final product. This will cause a crapload of problems later while we're testing and would usually require a larger amount of time to fix. Well, rather than take the time to properly fix the issue, 99% of the time we just kind of slap proverbial duct tape on the issue and say it's fine. Or even worse, if it isn't causing immediate issues, we basically sweep it under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. Oh, and security is literally the last thing we think about. And we basically think about it for a few minutes and go, yeah, it'll be fine. Sometimes we hire a security consulting company so we don't have to deal with it. Story 115. Former teacher here. Test scores are placed well before students. Special education, 504 plans, and other paperwork required by law is often not followed through on in poorer districts. Also, there are no real consequences for anything but the worst offenses until high school. If we know a student has zero chance of passing standardized testing in my district, they don't get as much help as someone who might be able to pass, despite needing it more. It's also nearly impossible to hold students back until about the high school level. That's how we get high school students who read at a second grade level. They can't be held back at many schools, and they know it, so why try? I really think this sets them up for failure later in life. Catching a kid up 1 or 2 grade levels is possible. Not so for students who somehow need to catch up on 6 grade levels. A lot of districts break state laws or federal laws on things like classroom sizes or education accommodations on a regular basis. Not because we want to, but because we don't have the resources to meet that standard. A big one is minor education plan accommodations. Think special education. A common problem in my old school was that students with certain paperwork were required to have a quiet area in the room to calm down. Perfectly reasonable. However, in a class of 30 or more students, there's no space for that area, so they have to go without, or display behavior bad enough that they get to leave the classroom for a while. Story 116. I'm a counselor at a summer day camp. I usually don't take a break during the day. We're entitled to one period off each day. I'm constantly exhausted because I never get enough sleep. I'm constantly on the verge of a mental breakdown, and sometimes I'm thinking about if I can get away with harming myself in the bathroom. We're told not to have favorite campers, but we do have favorites. It's impossible not to. We also have least favorites. We just have to do our best and not treat the kids differently according to how much we like each kid. Another thing is, the kids tell us everything about their home life. They're constantly talking about their parents, and some pretty suggestive stuff can come up. A kid has not yet told me anything too bad yet, but I do know that one of my camper's mothers is pregnant, and another camper's father thinks he's more important than God, although I think that my camper may have misunderstood that last one. Although the job does suck sometimes, I love it and I love my campers. It would be nice if I got paid more though. We're severely underpaid. Story 117. Retail. Many items are literally thrown around. Expensive ones too. Saw my coworkers dropping monitors, laptops, and TVs from 10 feet up all the time because they were too lazy to carry it down. I'm surprised any of that product actually makes it to the user in a functional state. This was Best Buy. Sales/marketing. We're trained 1,000 different ways to lie and mislead customers to get them to buy our product. Make your own informed decision and never go by what the salesman tells you. I will say it again. We are literally trained to lie to you as much as we can get away with by law. Education. Teachers talk crap about the students in the private staff rooms during lunch to vent frustrations. We also 100% skew student grades depending on how much we feel you respect or disrespect us. For example, if I have a really nice student, they'll probably never have a C in my class as long as the work was done. If I have an A-hole student, even if they try hard, they may struggle to get anything better than a C. I'd say it makes a solid 20% difference in your overall grade, which can be huge. Also, if you have a 79%, 89%, etc., and you just need that 1% to get a better grade, now you know who gets the 1% bonus and who doesn't. Have a late assignment? Guess who I show leniency to and who gets no mercy on the deadline. It's not a fair system at all, but it's the way the real world has worked for thousands of years. It's not how much you know, but who you know that gives you the advantage. Teachers are humans too. A significant portion of your grade is based on how your instructor perceives you. So, for those still in school, make sure you build a positive relationship with your teachers. This same treatment will carry on into your work life and beyond. Story 118. In large private social networks across America, your beloved clergy, the vast majority anyway, are talking about how furious they are at you and how stupid you are for wanting to open churches and synagogues and mosques right now. It's not that we love you and don't want you to die for your carelessness to kill other people, which we don't. It's also that God doesn't live in church, and the fact that you think an all-knowing, omnipresent deity is somehow entirely blocked from communicating with or hearing you because you can't eat potato salad in our social hall means we've failed to teach you anything. Story 119. Lawyer in private wealth management. Every single American should be mad AF about donor-advised funds. It's a giant legal tax scam for wealthy people to get a massive tax break by funneling their money into a vehicle that can then be used to encourage behavior that's beneficial to them. Here's how it works. For tax planning purposes, rich a-hole, let's call him Tim, needs to donate $1 million before year end. RAT doesn't really have any charities in mind this year, but his son will be applying to college in a few years. Sure, he could donate $1 million to Harvard this year and next year and the year after that and hope that Harvard gets the message, but his son is a dumbass, so it's a risk. Why would RAT donate $5 million without getting something in return, right? Donations aren't about charity, they're about leverage. What would be really helpful to RAT and his idiot offspring would be if RAT could somehow get the $1 million tax write-off now, but only give the money to Harvard or whoever later. Lucky for RAT, he can. He finds a wealth management company, Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, etc., and opens a donor-advised funds account and proceeds to donate $1 million into the account each year. On paper, this money no longer belongs to RAT. although he gets a monthly statement on the account like all his other investment and bank accounts. On paper, this money has been donated and now belongs to a charitable trust, and is merely awaiting distribution to a qualified charity. RIT has made the donation now, so he can get the tax deduction, but the money just sits there. No charity has yet gotten the benefit. And in most cases, the money can just sit there indefinitely. What's the holdup? Why isn't the money being distributed to a charity? It will be, once RIT gives the green light. That's right, RIT doesn't own the funds in the account anymore, but he still functionally controls the funds. So flash forward 5 years when RIT has built up a nice little balance of $5 million in his donor-advised fund, and his idiot son is applying for college. RIT can make a few phone calls and just play a couple rounds of golf and casually mention this $5 million sitting in a DAF account at Fidelity, just waiting for RIT to tell Fidelity where to donate the money. I'll probably just send it to wherever my dumbass son ends up going to school, RIT will say. Message received. Dumbass son will get admitted to Harvard around Christmas of dumbass's freshman year. RIT will suddenly and coincidentally decide to instruct the DAF to make some sizable annual contributions to Harvard. And that's how DAFs work. Except not just with college admissions, with everything. Board seats, internships, private hospital suites, wedding venues, you name it. It's legal bribery for the wealthy that comes along with a massive tax deduction. Well, former. Turns out I couldn't stomach it no matter how big the paycheck. Story 120. IT professional here. Companies hire people that require H-1B visa sponsorship for under-market salary, then require them to work way overtime and exceed expectations to keep the sponsorship. If they're promoted to a manager position, they're told that their entire team has to exceed expectations in order to keep their H-1B sponsorship. What ends up happening is that non-citizens are the only ones who get promotions because they're the only ones willing to work 70 hours a week that is required for the manager to exceed expectations. Then the manager becomes a director, the department stops hiring citizens that don't need a H-1B visa, and eventually the entire department becomes a single ethnicity. Because the C-suite wanted to save money. Story 121. I'm a pharmacist. CVS understaffs to such an extreme degree that it's unsafe. Pharmacists are not given enough time to check drug interactions and all of the other safety-related tasks. I've seen people put into the hospital, and the root cause is understaffing. More specifically, it's greed. CVS would simply rather make a few extra bucks rather than provide the bare minimum in staffing. For those that don't get it, the pharmacist is the last line of defense between you and fatal med errors. I understand that people need to make a living, but you really won't be able to work for CVS and feel good about yourself. The company is extremely unethical. CVS is even worse than the tobacco companies. Most people who smoke realize that tobacco puts them at risk. Most patients coming to CVS are oblivious to the systemic problems that can harm them.